I knew we would have
morning.
lower numbers.
Yeah.
during Election day. We have a lot of people doing professional development today.
What else would miss there? Deputy.
Oh, yeah, Tiffany's on. Okay, good.
You're ready to go anytime.
Okay. Mhm.
What else do we have?
Okay, well, we'll begin our meeting. Thank you all for being here today. We do have a smaller in person. We have more online. We have, oh, good.
Morning,
We have
you
a couple of other
exist.
people
Exist off the digital
coming
internet.
in. Thank you. I know that we have some people that are doing professional development today. It is election day and, schools are closed, but some, districts are doing professional development. I look forward to our discussion today, especially on the funding, recommendations, and, we'll continue forward. I, will tell you that I do need to leave at, 10, but I will be back hopefully by, 11:15. Help yourself to breakfast, and you're in good hands with Andy. I'm not sure Michelle will make it today.
We didn't hear she's not, so.
Yeah, I think she's, she's had some shoulder surgery. I'm not sure when she was having it. but
November 12th.
November.
I only know
12th.
because of the convention.
Oh, so maybe she is, maybe
Over
she
there
will
or
make it today, I don't know. Anyway, I look forward to us moving forward. We have our next meeting December 3rd, scheduled. I'd like us to think about that a bit. I mean, it's fine, but I have to be in an AASA conference, so I cannot be here that day at all. And I do think that will be when we start to consider things, so,
Fran, I also cannot be there that day. It's our new board member leadership conference.
I
also cannot be there.
okay, so.
Well, it seems to me that, the idea is after today, we will have gone through all recommendations. We will then have them written up in a form that will go out to people. And so whether we actually need to meet or whether we can do it by email and group chains,
Okay,
and to arrive at a final report for our January 1st deadline.
That might be a more efficient use of our time.
yeah, I would appreciate that. Is that all right with everyone? Unless there are major issues, and then we will, if anyone has issues, we will come back together and talk it through. But we have gone through all the recommendations, you're right.
We've gone through 2 of the 3. So-
Yeah.
And then we have finance today and then my independent recommendations and anybody else's independent recommendations.
Right,
To consider and then put it all together and hopefully develop a persuasive narrative to go with it.
and we know Andy will be great at that.
So I think we just move forward with Patrice.
And let's go. on
All
the
right.
funding.
The recommendations of the funding subcommittee are no surprise to any of you. We perhaps had the easiest task in that we probably have the least controversial recommendations. Also, interestingly enough, since we developed these, the recommendations of the 119K Commission came out, and there are certainly several areas where there is overlap between their recommendations and these, which bodes well for advocacy at the state level. So we strongly recommend that the state fully fund the excess cost grant by removing the within available appropriations language. That's the language that protects the state, but leaves every local district on the hook for an indeterminate amount of cost. Second recommendation is to include a 25% weighting for special ed students in the education cost sharing formula. And that is an issue that has been considered and debated in various circles. I don't, oh good, Lisa's on, excellent. I wouldn't want to be talking about funding without Lisa on. There are 3 additional recommendations that One is incentive grants to enable districts to develop collaborative programs that would reduce the need, would reduce the number of out placements that are needed. We know that there are upfront costs to initiating those programs, and this would help districts who want to be able to work together get over that initial hurdle. There is also a recommendation to develop a model contract for private provider services to expedite contract approval. This seems to particularly be an issue between districts and new providers. We heard that there was not an issue with existing arrangements, but if you are dealing with a new provider that doesn't have a template to work from, it can take a long time to get to that contract approval point. And finally, to task the state auditor with examining the cost differentials between various private providers. I think that's probably the recommendation that is fraught with the most challenges. But I could certainly leave that in the competent hands of the state auditors. So those are the recommendations.
Well, the two big things I want to say. First, I'm going to dissent on excess costs, because I don't think excess costs fund special education. I think we elude ourselves with the payment to municipalities. Now, I know I don't have the votes on that, so I will just do that in separate views. But I think we're misleading people by suggesting that excess costs actually fund special education. District boards of education, state finance boards, or local finance boards provide a budget for the school district spends the budget, and if there's money from the state to compensate for expensive placements, it goes back to the municipality that isn't reflected, particularly in special ed budgets, in any way. That's the less important point. The more important point is, it seems to me that it's, the 119 Commission had a 50% weight for special education and other weights, and has a really quite robust, bold proposal for funding of excess costs. And I think we would do well just to endorse what they do. I don't know that it makes a lot of sense to have a variety of ECS proposals. I think that, I would love to have money designated for special education, but I don't know how you do that without pushing money out and placing money from in other places. And so their proposal, which I guess they costed $550 million, seems to be probably the best way that we can move towards adequate funding for special education. And so rather than us proposing a 25% weight, my druthers would be to endorse what the 119 Commission proposed. So we come in with the united front on that.
So I'm just looking it up online. Can you explain to me what the group is, what the proposal is, and what kind of backing they have?
So the 119 Commission was created really by the Connecticut Council of Municipalities after the Dalio Foundation about disconnected youth. They came out with what they call a bold plan to address Connecticut's statewide crisis. And the big issue in there is funding of ECS. They have a proposal which increases weights in all sectors, does include a special ed weight for the first time. And why am I talking with Lisa's here? Lisa.
Yeah, when Lisa provide a perspective on this.
I just pulled it up. Would I be able to share my screen so that I could show the actual report to the group? So essentially, the Dalio Foundation commissioned a study to look at the number of disengaged and at-risk youth in the state of Connecticut. And they found that 119,000 youth and young adults were either disconnected or at risk. They then partnered with the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities, and they toured around the state, listening from various stakeholders to gain insight as to systems that could be changed in order to address and reduce the number of disconnected and at-risk youth in our state. And they really, in my opinion, they took a very holistic view of how to re-engage youth. They didn't just look at the education systems, but rather looked at a number of different systems, including criminal justice, housing. And they put out a plan to reduce the number of disconnected and at-risk youth. In their plan, they had a number of different funding components. And as Andy said, they're not all specifically tied to special education, but they are a very wide-ranging list of recommendations, specifically changes to the education cost sharing formula. And so one of their recommendations is to implement a student with disability weight in the education cost sharing formula, and they recommended that weight to be at 50%. So higher than the 25%. And I will say, Patrice, please back this up or make any modifications to what I just say. In the funding subcommittee, we were looking to implement the student with disability weight and to do so in a manner that is consistent with the multilingual learner weight, which is the 25% weight, kind of being more politically sensitive, right? Just to get some kind of weight in place and to have it match a current weight for multilingual learners. And the 119K Commission did not, I think, try and think about cost or what was actually feasible. They really went bigger and bolder. And so they recommended a student with disability weight of 50%. And they relied that 50% weight on a recent report over recent years about the cost to educate students with disabilities, which found that it generally on average costs 1.5 times the cost per pupil for students without disabilities. And so they recommended the 50% weight. And if you are all interested, I could pull, if I can share my screen, I can pull the overall report if people would like to see all of the other components.
Of which there are 22.
Yeah,
Is it available on the website? I can't find it.
It is available online.
it is
And I have
available.
one here, which I can pack it up now.
Yeah.
So it looks like I can pull it up.
Wow, not very visibly.
Is it's small? Okay. So yeah, if you pull it up yourself, it is, I can give you the website. ccm-ct.org, Young People First report. It's located on page 45. So to further, or to put this out there, when coming into this conversation to talk about the ultimate funding recommendations for students in special education specifically, given that this is a special education task force, I was going to recommend that at the very least, this task force consider recommending a 50% weight and kind of aligning our recommendations to the CCM report and to their advocacy efforts rather than kind of having two different percentages for consideration by the General Assembly. It is in total, the CCM recommendations, which include not just the student with disability weight, in total, it costs about $550 million. And at the end of the day, that's going to infuse more money equitably across the state of Connecticut, such that those districts that have generally lower property wealth and generally more students that are receiving special education services would receive an influx of significant support to support their K-12 education needs. So I don't know if this task force wants to consider recommending all of the other changes that they recommend, like a foundation adjustment, which in our opinion is very much needed, an increase in the multilingual learner weight, and then this 50% weight, or if this task force would prefer to just recommend or align our student with disabilities weight to the 50%.
You know how much of the 545 million is accounted for by the 50% weight for students with disabilities?
Our team has estimated that if you change the weight to 50% upon full funding, it would cost approximately $155 million.
Yeah, because I was thinking with the 25, it was about 70 million, right?
That's right.
Yeah,
So it's
so,
almost a third of the cost is students with disabilities.
The student with disability weight is a large component of the 550, but more so that foundation adjustment. Because that applies across, I mean, that's the base of the entire education cost sharing formula, so that is going to be extremely costly as well. However, you know, the foundation amount, which is supposed to reflect the cost to educate a student without additional learning needs, that has been in place and it's been the same number since the 90s. So we know costs go up every year, and if the state is not adjusting that foundation annually, it's a cost that is borne by local taxpayers to the extent that local taxpayers can afford an increase in their tax rate to continue to cover like inflation year after year.
And the other point about that, of course, is that as ECS accounts for less and less of the total cost of education in the state, that puts more of a burden on local property taxes, which just increases the inequity, which means that the richer suburban towns can spend more on it, they can and do spend more on education, and the urban areas proportionally less. And so it's actually a trend that increases the inequity we have in the state.
Well, I have no problem with moving it up to 50% because I wouldn't want to undercut what seems like I mean, I assume these few folks have good lobbyists. I hope they do. And if we join with them rather than undercutting them, it gives the legislators less room to wiggle out of it. I don't know anything about the foundation. It certainly sounds like that would impact special education, but I don't know if it's too big or outside of our realm.
Well, the foundation in the recommendation from the report is about a $900 increase per student in the foundation. I personally believe, I have for a long time, that the foundation, you know, CAPS is pushing for that. For one of our goals this year is to increase the foundation. It hasn't been increased, as Lisa said, since the 90s. And actually, I think it's reasonable to go to 12,000, whatever it is.
And when the formula was originally developed, that foundation was not designed to be a fixed number. It was put in place to reflect the cost of educating an average student in an average Connecticut district, with the notion that as that cost changed over time, the foundation would increase. The legislature chose to protect state funds and not implement it the way it was intended.
Right.
So according to these guys, if the foundation were inflation adjusted from 2013, it would go from 11,525 to 15,580.
Oh,
And meantime,
I thought it was going to,
no, but look at the last one. That's adjusted from 13.
oh,
And that compares to the sort of average per pupil in districts in the state, which is really very close to 20 right now, maybe over 20 this year. So it's what it is. I think, you know, I guess at least three options here. One is to go with the recommendations out of the group of a 25% weight. The second is to go with a 50% weight for special ed, or the. Did you see it on the screen? Okay.
You did. I was on the screen until I got here.
The thought that there are more than one Tiffany's.
Susan has her hand up.
Thanks, guys. I have a quick question. Are we recommending that paraeducators be given a living wage and benefits? Because won't that affect that 25%? I mean, how can schools do it if it's low? Someone can give me some education on that.
That is not currently a recommendation. It's part of my package of recommendations. It is the case that districts cannot afford to raise paraeducator wages unless the money's there. And this would provide substantial additional money. And so that, you know, my view is that we go full in on the 119 Commission recommendations.
That's
One, so that we have the funds to pay paraeducators and pay special education teachers. Two, so much of what we're talking about is the need to have interventionists to reduce, to provide early intervention and to perhaps reduce the eligibility rate for special education. And those folks come not from the special ed budget, but they come from general education.
Okay, because when we had the para ed, thank you, Andy. When we had the para educator, when they came and did the feedback, I was wondering if we had made any recommendations from that feedback.
As of right now, we have not adopted any recommendations regarding paraeducator or special education teacher pay. We're not done.
Does the one, is that part of the fiscal package that's presented by the 119? Again, I've just pulled it up for the first time. Do they talk about living wage? Do they talk about salary increases? Anything to that effect?
Not specifically.
No. But it doesn't prevent us from talking about it.
I understand. It was just
You
like,
know,
what's the
I mean,
overlap of what
you know,
we need?
Personally, it's going to be one of our goals for CAPS is elevating the profession. And part of that is asking for more dollars, sort of a new enhancement act for all educators. And so my thing would be, I think we could ask for that here. I wouldn't pull out special ed teachers alone. I would just say the profession needs a living wage, paraprofessionals and all teachers. I don't like pulling out subgroups of teachers, but all teachers should be paid. And I do think that for special ed teachers and all teachers, that is a challenge to getting more candidates in. So why not add it in the funding?
And we haven't come to that issue yet, and I do disagree with Fran.
Okay.
Not on enhancement, but on separate pay for shorter terms.
Yeah, I'm not a
That's-
proponent
it's okay.
of separate areas. But at any rate, I would endorse the CCM Dalio report. That the only thing is, I'm not sure that we want to go that broad with the foundation and all of that, because we are the special ed task force. So I'm not sure.
Well, that's what I was asking. The way it brings a good point, like, there are all these interventions so that we can help reduce the numbers of special education students. It is related. I wouldn't have a problem.
Certainly is, and a lot of special ed kids, spend a lot of their time in general education as well. So it's not completely a separate silo.
Well, again, I'm fine with moving our subcommittee's recommendation up to 50. I think that's a problem, and we could literally quote the findings of the other research as well.
So how does then, in terms of the question about would we support the 119K recommendation about the foundation, is that versus supporting removing the cap on excess cost? Because realistically,
No.
the likelihood of that foundation being raised to where we all think it should be, I am sorry to say, it is not going to happen. And to lose the support that many of us believe is critical to restore that safety net that the excess cost grant was designed to provide. I, for one, have to remain a strong advocate for that.
Oh, I am as well. I mean,
And I am too.
All right.
I understand what Andy's saying, but the reality is money is money is money, and I'm on a board of ed, and we need those funds coming into the town. I understand that, but it's basically reimbursement.
Yeah, I did in no way mean that we would obliterate the excess cost. We have to have that. As a matter of fact, even the 50 million, I think that's underestimated. What I received from the commissioner lately was something in the area of 90 million. Is that right, Brian?
I'd have to double check on that.
I thought it was 90 million,
Yeah.
which she sent to me. When I asked how short we would be with 181, I thought it might have been 261 million or something.
Lisa probably has the answer to that.
Oh, yeah, Lisa probably has it. Lisa?
Yeah, Fran, I think the difference there is fully funding up to the tiered levels that are in statute versus fully funding to 100%.
Well, I'm
Oh.
looking for fully funding to 100%.
Yeah, it's gonna be closer to the 75, 80. If you're hearing 90, I mean, it's a current year thing, so you're always guessing at what the claims are gonna come in.
Yeah,
And then I had my hands up in response to the question about the commission and making recommendations on teacher pay. They don't specifically, or para-educator pay, they don't specifically call that out specifically, but if you look at Aligned Action 12, they do speak to the need to invest in the teaching profession and to ensure that all classrooms have sufficient staffing and that people are appropriately compensated. They do talk about the inequity with regards to teacher pay by public school district / zip code. So they do touch upon it generally, but they don't explicitly make a recommendation and call specifically for certain salary levels.
Well, I don't think we're talking about endorsing the entire 119K commission report. We're talking about either endorsing action item 7 as in totality, or merely recommending that that there be a special education weight, which goes up to 50%. And then in line with that, as a political matter, Patrice is certainly correct that adding, 90 million to excess cost is not going to happen if there's a substantial increase in ECS. I don't know that we need to make that choice. I think we can recommend both.
I think we need both.
I mean, money's fungible. Even if you have a student with disabilities weight and it goes to the district, there's no requirement that the district actually utilize those specific funds for the provision of special education. It's just increasing state support for K-12 education generally to support whatever it is that the Board of Education, feels that they need to and are approved to fund. So generally, if the report is implemented, like New Haven would receive $42 million in increased state support, period. That could be used to fund any service across the board.
That would be awesome. I could spend it.
Well, that's right. And the inverse of that is true too, which is that just as increasing the special ed weight does not necessarily mean that money is spent on special ed, increasing these other weights does not mean that it's not spent on special.
Right. And I don't know about doing the whole 7. I mean, I prefer to focus on the 50 because there's other things in here that are not related to special education in my mind. Keep our other recommendation.
I support this report, but I feel that the task force should be focused on special education. And so I would concur that we endorse the 50 and include the excess cost. I would also like to throw on the table the elevating the profession in terms of the funding and the salaries for all educators needing to increase. I just don't want to call special ed teachers out on that. I believe that they are part of the whole.
Well, can we go through the rest of the finance recommendations before we return to the elevating the profession? Because I think it's a much more complicated issue.
Okay, but it is part of the funding recommend. It could be part of the funding
That's right.
recommendation. Right? Okay.
So one way or another, are we basically in agreement that we call for full funding of excess costs?
Yes.
Yeah.
Full funding, not tiered, full funding.
Yes.
I'll write separate comments on that. Are we in general agreement that we ask for 50% special education weight in the ACS formula? And that's,
Yes.
and not the rest, of the liberal.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Are we in general agreement that we propose a program of incentive grants whereby districts to provide multi-district programs? Oh, wait, or, oh, you have both. Those are two separate questions. One is incentive grants to build multi-district programs, and two is incentive grants to build capacity in districts to reduce the need for outplacement.
I think both are necessary.
I know.
think
They're
districts
both
need to have,
necessary.
like, the flexibility to either work alone or work in concert with
Yeah.
one another.
Do we just want to be general about that, or do we want to put a dollar figure? And do we want to be specific as to who administers the incentive grants besides Brian?
We just write Brian.
But it should, I mean, I'm just trying to figure out, like, how do you, if it's gonna be such that there's certain parameters that are gonna be placed in making a determination, I think we have to be considerate of that versus if we need it, how do you get it, right? So I don't know if we're gonna say, you know, like some of the grants that come out, well, you know, you have to apply in this district to get in this district, but if you are desperate need and you're having a proposal, I mean, I trust you, Brian, but I also wanna make sure that if we need it, we get it. So I'm just wondering, how do we word that?
Well,
Are you saying, are you asking like the difference between a competitive grant versus like?
Right, like we
and
get
no,
it,
A
Yeah,
need-based grant.
yeah.
a need-based,
Right, so that's dollars, right?
right?
Yeah, so
Versus it's an incentive, like we
Yeah.
need it, we should be able to access it.
there are
not having
entitlement
to-
grants.
Yeah.
Typically, incentive grants are not guaranteed.
No, I
There's
know,
an
that's-
Application.
No, that's what,
Yeah.
that's my problem with that.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I'm saying.
Well, I
It's
think-
hard, so you said it better than me, yes.
No,
I'm
no,
looking
I
to
think that's what
get
you were
it.
saying.
The sort of the need-based issue, I think a lot with the first two recommendations. I think that when we talked about this before, this was more to be administered as a competitive grant. Like you make a proposal and you explain the program that you want to start and why you want to start it and what the need is, and you apply. Right?
That's what an incentive grant is.
Right.
No, I understand that piece, but what my suggestion is that through this application process, I'm hoping that there would be more consideration for folks who have more need than others. So again, I know there's been some things that are out there and this district may get it, this district may get it, but off the bat, all the urban districts need it, right? So we're competing for a grant that I think should be something that's an entitlement. I'm just saying.
so my general question was, do we have a general recommendations like the one that came out of the work group, which I think has much less chance of serious consideration than if we have a detailed proposal with process, dollar amounts, things like that.
Do we have a proposal?
Huh?
I have a proposal ready for you if you need it. Once we get the money.
Good luck.
I can tell you a dollar amount if you really want to know.
Well, or should we just say all money goes to New Haven?
Yes, no, that's not nice. No, I wouldn't say that. No, that's not nice.
She'll get a little bit.
No, I would give it to all the people who need it.
I'm sure there's a way to write incentive grants such that there's a weight given to
Right.
districts that are more in need.
Yes, and
But-
Brian's pretty liberal with that anyway. I mean, to be honest with you, I'm just putting that out there just so we can make sure that we're high on the list to get it.
The reason why this is an additional recommendation instead of a hardcore one is that, I worry that the folks will use this as a way of getting out of doing the first two. Like, I would eliminate everything if I thought you just submit the first two and we'd get them. The other ones are sort of pie in the sky, like when we develop systems that might reduce, like increasing paragraphs. So that, these are not gonna fix the problem by themselves. Those first two could go a long way.
Were you guys able to identify a number that would be associated with the need for the incentive grant program? I don't know that you have the data for that. is the problem.
Ryan, are there incentive grant programs now?
There are not, most of the grants that we've had previously have been basically entitlements that, in other words, if you apply, you'll get the funds. So that's if you have a set amount of money divided by 170 LEAs, you know exactly how much each is gonna get. So if there's a set fixed number, cost of an administrator and a BCBA and a teacher and, you're talking potentially $500,000
So it's
for
more-
one program.
So I could just tell
full
you,
program.
there's a proposal that we have right now and for the capital costs, and that may not be everyone, but I'll start with the personnel. The personnel is about $1.4 million. And this is to run an alternative program. If you're looking at capital costs on top of that, it's another $1.2 million. Depending on what you're looking at, it could be a range that could be, you know, somewhat less than that. But I'm saying that you could look at about $3 million for one program.
Which is
Have there
why,
been
like,
any programs in the past, Brian?
what's that?
Have there been competitive incentive programs?
So most of the stipends we've done have been entitlements.
Okay.
Yeah,
Most,
we
correct.
have had, I'd have to go back and check, like, there haven't been many in the 7 years that I've been in this role that have been competitive, but there have, I want to say there,
There's
Yeah.
a stronger connections grant that wasn't special ed.
Weren't there
Right.
weren't there ones with ESSER funds that you had?
there were,
Yeah.
yeah.
They were competitive, or were they entitled?
No,
They're entitled.
if it was enough, if you apply and meet the criteria
Yeah,
and,
you got
and
it.
like, we went back and forth with districts to make revisions and things like that to make sure that they were meeting the needs of the grant.
Yeah, I was just wondering about the, you know, if there were other competitive incentive grant programs, what kind of range of numbers were we talking about?
Yeah,
There was like the
Yeah,
mental health
it's-
grants, they have the stronger connection grants, there weren't a lot of them. And those weren't like, they weren't special education specific. But for the most part, we met the criteria, it was pretty liberal, but.
yeah.
Lisa,
we had some-
Lisa, you have your hand up?
I do. So there's two types of costs, right? As Tiffany just mentioned, there's the capital cost and like this additional staffing or other operating costs. Something that the General Assembly did last year that I'm wondering if this task force would like to recommend as well is they provided an increase in the local school construction state support for districts when they build out capacity for like early childcare and pre-K. And so I'm wondering if we want to recommend that also as a kicker, and the kicker with early childcare was 15%, if the task force would like to recommend that it provide that additional 15% also for the build out of special education services in district. And then also have an operating side as well, or another capital authorization and allocation that can also support outside of local school construction, because local school construction, that's like pretty large capital projects, either a significant renovation largely or a rebuild or a new construction of a school. So kind of hitting at this incentivization in a number of different ways. Local school construction, if you're doing a new build, or if you're doing a major renovation to an existing school, and then other capital support for other capital needs, and then the operating side as well.
The 15% is 15% of what?
So if your state reimbursement under local school construction is like 60%, and if you are building out early childcare capacity in your district, instead of receiving your normal 60% reimbursement for the state, you would receive 75% on the cost associated with that build out, and you cannot exceed 100%. So potentially, if you have a very high need district, like New Haven has a high reimbursement percentage, they would get an additional 15% on top of their normal reimbursement rate, and potentially up to 100% for the costs associated, the capital costs associated with building out in district special education or regional special education space.
I have a sort of visceral reaction against tying ourselves to school construction in any way. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but that sort of has a bad taste
Why?
Why?
because of the scandals with school construction over the past few years.
No, but that doesn't mean we're all scandalous. Doesn't mean that we're all scandalous. I'm trying to get capital money for construction now. I mean, I understand that, but I think that, you know, we have to do better, and maybe it just helps us learn lessons from the past, right?
That's so positive.
Yeah.
That's a good election day message.
Or mine.
I think the point is a good one, that if this incentive was provided for build out of daycare centers, right,
Right.
then it could be added to the cost of special education programming as well.
Yeah, I would want an operating side of that as well, but I don't see any downside to including a capital.
Because we're gonna- So it's.
Should we regroup as subcommittee to bring on a couple more members to like have numbers for them? Is that what they want? I don't know.
I don't know that, you know.
I don't know how we're gonna get numbers.
Yeah, I don't know.
Numbers, I think it's pulling out the air for numbers.
Well, I think you're looking for something specific, and that is a start to at least match what happened with early childhood last year. But I think it's just a start, if we start with school construction, I don't think we can leave it just with that.
No.
No, I mean, I
But if
still
we
like
want,
the
like,
incentive.
percent,
grant
yeah.
I do
Idea,
too.
really-
and I
Right,
think we
I think
should.
we, but I think we could build out from that.
But some districts, especially with a lower enrollment, some may need the capital, some may not need the capital. They may need just the
And they already
operating
have space.
incentive. 'cause
But I do want to emphasize, we are talking about not just within the district, but in.
But, oh, yeah, an
Because
inter-district.
I know we don't play as well together as we should, but like if New Haven was a center and the surrounding towns could participate, that means that a small town doesn't need the funds because there would be funds
Right.
in you know, the area where it has the most capacity. Like
Yeah,
I really
yeah.
feel strongly about
And
that.
Sonia does that right now, and they charge other districts. We just need every CD.
Right?
I was just trying to,
It's okay.
just trying to flip the issue a little bit instead of looking at the funding, like what, so from the finance committee's perspective and the legislative, this council, what is the outcome that we're trying to achieve?
Less outplacement in
Yeah.
private settings.
Well, that's one of them.
Well, and
And also
increasing
more-
capacity.
Yeah, and also
Well-
regional cooperation.
I think we need to define what that is exactly, because if New Haven develops their own program in district, their LRE data looks the same as if they were in your program or your program. So how is that money, like, we would have to show results from the outcomes of those stipends going out, I believe, to say, did this
Reduce your out-of-district.
did this produce the results we hoped it would? And if we aren't able to look exactly at LRE numbers
Hmm.
and only at, okay, they're in their neighborhood versus they're in a different
Right.
town, that's a different type
No,
of,
this would be the cost. I mean, my assumption, it is an assumption because I'm not a numbers man. I was a religion major. Is that the outplacement would cost a huge much more than an in-house. But if I'm wrong, if that is not the case, then.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So because to justify the funds, whatever the dollar amount is, we should be able to show the results after the stipends are delivered. And if districts are getting only a small amount of money, especially the more districts that get money, the less amount that's going to be for each district. If I get $100,000, that's great, but what data are there to show that that impacted LRE? Or for that matter, our capacity as a district to serve? Similarly, like with like some of the regional programs that are in place, those are outplacements, even though they're regional. So I just think if we can describe that.
So one kid moves to district, and
People are-
suddenly your budget gets blown.
But aren't there
Yeah.
two things that we can talk about? And I don't know if this is it's not like a metric we can actually look at, but there's two things that we know right now. Right now, we know that out-of-district programs are at capacity, so districts are struggling to find them, so it fills the need. And also,
Yeah.
Connecticut has one of the highest out-of-district placement
Yeah,
rates, so
even though it's
those things,
reduced.
even,
over
right,
the
to
last few
reduce
years.
that, I think that those descriptors even still helps to justify. I understand your point. I mean, each district should be looking at, if it's reduced the number of students, maybe in out-of-district placements,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that the descriptor of us still having a large, even though we're declining with the number of students out of district is still a need.
Yeah.
In a district, because you can't find them, and also two, we still have one of the highest around.
Because I'm just saying, so ultimately, we care about kids' achievement.
Right.
Finance is part of it for sure, but is this a fiscally driven recommendation? Or is it like, if my child's achieving at outplacement A and I bring them back into district and they're not achieving, that's not what we're looking for, obviously.
No.
It could save money,
I talk about
so.
I talk about it from an LRE perspective, and any time someone asks about outplacement, when people think it's a funding issue
Yeah.
or a money issue, I say it's a child issue.
Right.
We're thinking about the child's life trajectory and really making sure that we're educating students within the least restrictive environment.
Yeah.
So that's secondary,
Yeah.
even though we know that's one of the I mean, it's an impact on that, but for me, honestly, I look at it through the lens of really changing the trajectory of a child's life versus putting them in a very restricted program.
But I think the reason that this was addressed by the finance committee, if I think back to our earlier discussions, was in part because we were trying to address the skyrocketing costs associated with outplacement. And we all said there are ways to control costs if we have more capacity to build in-district programs. We can't build in-district programs because we don't have the capital to start the programs in the first place. That's why we need the incentive grant program. Right?
With equal or better than results for children.
Right.
But it wasn't just about funding.
But I just think if we
It was
vote
also
in-
about least restrictive
Right.
environment
Right.
and having them be part of, their own neighborhood, et cetera. I think it's kind of sad that if you do a regional one in district where kids can, mainstream, if you will, even if it isn't their own district, that we still count that as an out-of-district placement.
Well, no, they could. I'm just saying, like, if it's a separate location and there aren't peers, because there are programs like that, that are run by the rest, that are regional or districts come together, that's still 0% time with non-disabled peers. If it's in a school building and they have access to peers, whether it's their own district or not, that would reduce, that would accomplish what you're
And
mentioning.
we
Yeah.
talked about that example too, and I think Ansonia has one of those programs that's partnered with ACES where you're inside a district elementary school. And so it's also increasing time with non-disabled peers.
Exactly.
But I don't know that the role of this recommendation is to specify for districts that it has to accomplish that purpose. I think the role of this recommendation is to establish that there is an incentive grant program with money available. And if you want to tag on to that, districts that are programs, proposals that are also increasing time with non-disabled peers will be weighted more heavily for approval than programs that are not going to do that, then you could build that into the application process. But this just establishes there will be such a thing as an incentive grant program.
Yeah, I just brought that out as a way to show the state, or the legislatures or the budget, like what the outcome is so that they would continue to fund this, or like, what's the result? Like, is this achieving what we hope, not just,
I think
Here's
that's,
some money.
I totally agree with you, Brian. I think accountability, we've got to have the accountability piece in there.
yeah.
And the accountability piece comes from us establishing what metric we're using to measure this. And the existing metrics, I think, are not very good because, for example, that Ansonia program counts as an out-of-district placement for an Ansonia student.
Yeah.
And we don't want to use that definition because it's, and so I think we have to think about what we want to specify as the measurement that we're hoping to change, the needle that we're trying to move.
Yeah, it just may be tricky to pin down those data because of the amount of money will be, if the amount of money received is half of an administrator's salary,
Right.
like, how do you?
Yeah, that's not gonna do anything.
Well, I think that's
That's
one of
not-
the reasons
that's
not
gonna
to
be like,
dilute it by making it into an entitlement grant, but making
Yeah.
it competitive.
Yeah.
Right? Because you don't want to take a pot of money that I think is, likely to be smaller than, recommendations 1 and 2, and then sort of have to divide it up among 169 towns.
Yeah.
I don't think that will accomplish
No.
the purpose that we're trying to accomplish.
I'm thinking of the Smart Start grant for preschool. It doesn't cover everything, but it gave us, $100,000
Yeah.
to start a classroom.
Yeah.
And, I just sent out a survey, 23 districts are interested in starting that. Even if it isn't covering everything, it is a help in getting more preschools established. And I think we're thinking the same way here.
Sorry.
I just have one quick question. Would this cover anything like the Farmington Diagnostic Center, for example? I really wanted one of those in Bridgeport where it would be regional, where if there were behavior issues or that kind of thing, kids could go for, not be identified as special ed as yet, but could go for a period of time with therapeutic interventions, et cetera. And they would work with the neighborhood school to allow that child to come back, work with the, teachers and that type of thing. Would that cover anything like that?
Well, I think that the multi-district program covers that, I think, from the recommendation, the way it's written now.
Well, it's not special ed though. It would be prior to.
Well, isn't it potentially diagnostic placement?
Yeah,
Yeah, I think
I don't know.
For kids that are in the
Yeah.
referral process.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
what-
evaluated.
Majority of kids that are.
what it would not affect is
Yeah.
out of district placement numbers, however, under the current definitions. Because if you're in the Farmington Diagnostic Center, you're outplaced.
Yeah, but
Well,
you're
unless
not-
it was a diagnostic placement, if it was a temporary 45-day
Mm-hmm.
or something. But you're right.
It might be for a few months or it might be for a few weeks, whatever. I'm sorry.
So CES, we tried to run this in Fairfield County because that was what our rep council members from Greenwich and all the lower Fairfield wanted. And we couldn't get people because you were selling seats for these young groups to get them before the issues were happening, like 3, 4, 5, and trying to get them back to district. And they wouldn't, we tried to pilot, we started to, put all this money into it and it didn't go anywhere.
You couldn't get students.
Because they wouldn't send them up. They're like, well, we need you to come this way. They literally wanted us to go into a Greenwich, a Stanford, or, wherever down there. And it didn't go anywhere. And we ended up, our transition program took over and we did well there because we already had the selling staff students.
But Farmington did very well.
Yeah.
On the
But
other-
Lower Fairfield's a different beast, as you know.
Yeah.
I'm still trying to identify whether we can pick a number that will make sense for this if we're gonna make a recommendation. Is there anything, Brian, that we can identify, like, that came through ESSER, like that had a dollar figure associated with it, that we could say, this is a number that makes sense to attach to this?
And I think, oh, sorry, I wasn't gonna answer. I have Brian. Go ahead, Brian. Sorry, Brian, I can't help myself.
Brian,
I'm sorry.
Take it away.
I'm still nerd on my business.
Yeah, I mean, so we could look at data, like we could look at LRE data, and in my mind, something like this, perhaps you start small and build upon the success from it. So if you identify, let's say we can do this for 40 districts, let's say, in the first year, based on LRE data, we would prioritize the need, that these districts, are, have lower percentages of time with non-disabled peers than others, and then, divide a number by that to, just taking 40 districts, if we gave $250,000 to 40 districts, that's $10 million. So that's like a starting point to kind of look at for either way. I can look back at some of the ESSER funds, but those, we had $16 million for ESSER that was special education related for the first round of grants that we distributed. There was 1.1 million for dyslexia tutoring that went out as part of that. We had $950,000 that went to the collaborative that we have with the Rusk Alliance to conduct evaluations on behalf of districts during that shortage time. So those are some of the ranges. We had a larger chunk of money for recovery funds for special education. And that was 16 million.
Okay. Does that sound reasonable? Did you have
Yeah.
another number in
Well,
mind, Tiffany?
Not if I need $3 million, I'm not gonna get, so I think that what Brian has done is that when there's grants that come out, depending on your district size,
Yeah.
your pot is somewhat, what you can access is larger.
Yeah.
So if we do it in the same way, but definitely I think that number needs to be larger if you're really thinking about doing it. And I don't know to what extent people are actually trying to create in-district programs or create different programs that have capital needs on top of personnel, so that range would be a lot different. And I don't know whether it has to be a cap and split evenly. So if it does have to be an incentive, really, how do we set those parameters, amongst that? But I think 16 million is low. To be quite honest, if you're going to split that across even 40 districts, it's a low number.
No, I agree with you, Lucky, but what I look at is the outplacements from Hartford. And, I'd love to do something to substantially reduce that. And a $250,000 grant is not gonna do anything.
I think we're talking about a couple million.
Many million, yeah.
3.
So
Tiffany says 3.
Yeah. Just another example, like with the prorated piece. So last legislative session, there was a bill for paraprofessional PD. and it's prorated based on the number of paraprofessionals you have in your district. So, there are qualifiers like that where people can access more or less money depending on whatever factor is given. Whether it be LRE data or we use for the pandemic number of IEPs. So number of students with IEPs, you can access more money than that.
But even go back to Brian's point about maybe trying to figure out where we can start and build. Why not take a look? And I think just to Andy's point about even Harper, I don't know what their data is, but maybe these are the 5 schools that have the highest ones. Start there with something, figuring out what that cost could be and then building, right? Maybe this is something that we phase in over a period of time. I'm not just saying that for New Haven Public Schools, but I'm saying that quite honestly, if we're looking at the numbers.
I agree with you. I think more to a fewer district would make a lot of sense, but what
Because
I'm
then
also,
you'll actually have something, because if this is a drop in the bucket, it's not gonna make an impact.
what I also hear Brian saying is, let me just ask you if this is what you're saying.
Mhm.
You are much more comfortable with an entitlement-based program where if a district meets the criteria, they get the money, than in making judgments, competitive judgments about various applications.
I don't think
I
it's a
agree.
comfort level. It's we could build in parameters and weight it. We've done that type of thing before in the department.
Right.
Yeah, so I don't, it's not a level of comfort. It's just the monies that have come down, trying to distribute them in an equitable way is basically why most of the, stipends we've had have been entitlements.
Yeah, I just
And
don't
for
know
the
what-
fact that, the monies that are coming through, we want to make sure are spent on special education.
Yeah, I don't know what the word equitable means in this context. I would rather fund a few programs where we're actually going to move the needle, than fund a whole bunch of programs and not see much effect.
Is $20 million a reasonable figure here?
Okay, sold.
Yeah.
25
So-
million, you said?
Do I hear 30?
Right, thirty kidding. You said 50
Money
million.
is good.
Just like the other thing, right? Just like the BCS form.
I don't have
25
that like farmhouse
We went to-
engineer thing.
Yeah.
I think the point of efficacy though, like, we do need to impress upon people how, like, life-changing, like, how just transformative this is. So I think people who are not in this world would not grasp that. And so I don't know how we convey that, but,
That should be.
it's, it's gonna affect families in so many positive ways. If we can really make this useful.
Is there a successful program that either you look to or anyone here looks to that has done it successfully as a district, even if it's a wealthy district, that we could have people come in and testify from? Say that would differentiate their lives, like, I don't even know that exists.
There are definitely programs, and there are definitely districts that have made reductions in their out-of-district placements that we can point to.
We also
So,
want to
right.
prove that also improves the kids' quality of life, the family's comfort with the district.
Yeah,
And it's hard to, because even to Brian's point, like, there's different variables. If you're in a transient district, you're dealing with different numbers all the time. If you're in a district who has steady enrollment, you can probably see the reduction a lot easier than kids who are getting, folks who are getting folks in and out all
Moving
year
in.
long, right?
that's right.
Honestly.
And I agree
it's hard.
that we don't want to, that's not the headline. It's not, we reduce outplacement numbers, right? The headline is exactly like you said,
We
like.
kept home and
Well, yeah.
gave people what they needed.
And the needs are
Yeah.
actually being met. I think
The
that's.
needs are being met.
Because right now we have unmet needs.
Yeah.
Which is a problem. And I think that a district like New Haven could probably, you could get a census of all the seats filled, like the moment you open the
Yeah.
doors. I think there are rural districts in Connecticut that are the need is to build an inter-district program.
Yeah.
Because of low census
Yeah,
across
sure.
districts. So I think that the need is gonna vary dramatically from one district to another.
Okay, so but the basic point here is to reduce out-of-district placements. The multi-district programs are just a way to do that, for certain smaller districts.
And also to meet the needs, because sometimes there are no out-of-district placements
True,
within
true.
a reasonable driving distance of wherever the kid is located.
I think the narrative has to be both and. It's really about LRE and, as an outcome of that, it does reduce the funding need for students. But that's really should be the driver of that, even though I know it's coming out of our funding recommendation. It really is about meeting the needs of our students.
Yep.
Within
So-
our restrictive environment.
I'm writing down $20 million
You said
over.
Over how many years?
No, for the first year,
For the first.
for the pilot
Well,
program.
Okay.
Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, let's,
You want a personal investment.
let's start with that. Let's draft up something, take it out, you know, what goes.
Yeah.
You get the.
I get 3 billion.
That's not-
I got 3 billion.
Adam down, he's gotta go to all of our.
Lisa, do we have to specify this sort of program, the money given has no year on it? Or can be spent over a period of years rather than has to be spent or returned? Yeah.
Is it capital or is it
No, I'm talking about operating.
operating? So it'll lapse at the end of the year if it's not utilized.
We could write around that, right?
You could probably set up a non-appropriated account, siphon off revenue, put it in a non-appropriated account, and then it stays in that account indefinitely, so it wouldn't be a general fund appropriation.
But if it's a general fund appropriation, it has to be used within the year of return.
It'll lapse, or the General Assembly will need to carry it forward. But annual budget process. So a smarter thing to do, if you wanted to just sit there until it's utilized, is to set up a non-appropriated account.
And I've heard from a number of superintendents that setting up these programs with annual appropriations is not possible. That, the spend out is not that clear, and that if the money's available for a number of years, such a program is a lot more effective than the program where the money has to be used within the year.
Yeah, I mean, with the funding recommendation, I can help to draft language to ensure that it goes into a non-appropriated account that is used for this purpose. A bonding authorization, though, stays there forever until it's canceled by the General Assembly. So that doesn't have the same annual time limit to it.
Just speaking of which, as Lisa just said, I'm just wondering, so maybe there's 2 things that we're asking for. So we're looking for money to build the programs, but if there's capital that district needs, maybe that's not a part of this incentive grant. Maybe there's another way of tapping into something, some bonding money, right?
Was that the 15%?
Yeah, the
reimbursement
personal
for
cost.
capital costs for-
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if there's a way so that whatever the money is, that you have an opportunity to tap into more than one thing. You could get the incentive grant, but then there's money that could be here for cost, for capital cost.
Yeah.
That you don't have to do that all
If
in
you do
your
the school
incentive.
construction
Right.
incentive in addition to
Right.
this incentive grant,
Yep.
then you have both the operating
Yep.
cost and the capital
Yep.
cost.
Yep.
Okay, let's move on to the model contract. Karen?
Yes.
Right.
You're right.
Right.
Talk
I'm on what?
talk to us about it.
I have no objection to a model contract. I mean, I think, as I mentioned before, I think many, schools and districts struggled in the beginning when this first came out to come to, an agreement, but it's almost, once you get one, then the next year you're starting from something that you both agreed to, and so maybe there are changes. So I'm not opposed if there's a new provider, or even if there's a current provider that thinks that this contract is better. I think it would be important to have representatives from the privates and school districts creating this model contract, but I have no objection to that.
I do, because each
Okay.
district, each of them, I'm telling you, because it's like living in a nightmare every year, that there's different, different providers who want different things every year. So unless, I mean, that's great if we get to this model thing, but I don't know, at some point in time, everyone has to agree what it is. And then once we agree upon it, we can't change it. This becomes like an annual thing with some providers, I'll just be honest.
Well, like what kind of things are being?
Like people are asking us to change all kinds of things in the
You
contract
can't
every year.
mandate contract language for everybody across the
Right.
state for in perpetuity. So when we're talking about a model contract, it's a model that you start with, right? And then you get to, as the contracting parties get to ask for changes to the model
Right.
based on needs on both sides.
No, I get that piece, but then if that's the case, I would imagine that that would eliminate every year having to come back and do it again. But even when there's been language that we have to have these contracts, it seems like it happens every year. So,
This is a model contract.
I don't know if this is gonna get us to any end.
This is not compulsory. This is not
Right,
beautiful.
I just don't see it getting us anywhere. I don't know if that would be a recommendation.
The idea that we heard, that we were trying to address was the districts and providers that were struggling from the beginning to get any contract in place. And with now the state requirement that there be a contract, to at least get them over that initial hurdle. It was not going to solve any ongoing contract disputes.
Or force anyone to change what they did.
Right.
This is just for those districts that are struggling to get one going the first time.
And can't they just use council to do that?
Money.
I'm just saying, because we've done it, and even when doing that with council, it's like we go back and have to do it again. So it's not saving any money because people are asking for things. I'm just letting you know that's from a practical point of view of what happened.
But then it's a bargaining point, right?
But
I
it
mean, when
is
you're
every
talking-
year, like
No,
we're
I
going
know.
back and forth with the same people. Oh, can you change this? We just changed this last year. We're changing this now again. Okay. I'm just saying, I don't know if it's, I don't have any issue with it. I'm just
Yeah.
telling you, I don't know if it's really gonna get us anything different.
Yeah,
At
I
least
mean,
from my-
I don't have an objection, but I also don't see any long-term benefit.
Well, I think this was approached, at one point, I sat on a task force or something, we were trying to come up with a model
Yeah,
contract,
that
and I
was
don't,
years ago,
I
right?
don't know what
I
happened.
remember that meeting.
Yeah.
Was it contract? Well, that's sad. if you remember it. Remember it?
Yeah.
Oh,
And then it
That
was weird, I don't know what.
Well,
happened.
and you see a lot of meetings, right?
oh my God.
Well, I think
That must
we,
have been a memorable.
that's what we did, yeah, and I think CAPSUP was involved in
Yeah.
Concase, and we had, some representation from board attorneys here. But I think one of the things I would say could be a benefit is to ensure that there are certain things that are included in the contract across the state.
Well, that's good.
For example, what's come up recently are sometimes food, like lunches and
Yeah.
things like that, not district placements. That's often not thought of at the PBT table,
Don't
but
get
it's
me going
something
on
that.
that, Brian.
What's that?
Don't get me going on the lunches.
Exactly. So that's one thing that we could say we would expect to see. Another thing we could say that we would expect to see is, on-site visits, or visits or oversight in general from the LEA and the program. So things of that,
I
I
like
think
that.
could be where it doesn't necessarily, like you said, it's just a model,
Like
but
you
we
pay
would
for-
expect to see these things. And then when the auditors of public accounts go in and look at the contracts, they can look for those across. Not that they just have a contract in place, but it's thinking about these different things.
I like that. That seems like that would make more sense.
Mhm.
Well, would that
Well
be,
said, yeah.
would that be a proposal instead? The Department of Education publishes a list of what needs to be covered in a contract between a private school and a school district?
I would worry, wouldn't want the list to be like exhaustive or I mean, however, we could say, I think model contract covers it, with the sections, because we ran into this, I think, when we were trying to develop one.
Well, also the
So
state didn't want
individualized.
to put its imprimatur on the model contract.
Yeah.
But I think
Yeah.
both of the things that we have right now, the data services and the youth service bureau things are not contracts. They're MOUs. I know it says contracts here, but, they were developed by a collaborative group of private agencies. And
Yeah.
it wasn't that the state came out and said, this is your MOU for youth service bureaus. It was a joint effort to establish a group of shared expectations.
But
Or
even
yes,
if the
like
state's
we
been in
pick
on
that
it to
up.
make those
Yeah,
regular
of
possibilities,
course.
hey, don't forget about lunch.
Yeah,
Yeah, like-
we could,
You know what I-
develop a list. I'm just saying it wouldn't be exhaustive. Like there could
They want to come back and ask us to
additions.
pay.
Well, it could be,
My client has to be reimbursed for lunch right now.
it could be,
She has no money.
it could be both a list and some model language, I suppose. And the fact that the contract has to cover it, I suppose, could say, the contract says that this provider will provide no lunch. That covers the subject.
But can I ask a question? Because I'm just wondering, how does this tie into, like, when you're doing approvals of the approved private special education program? Shouldn't there be some sort of parallels of like what we actually see? I don't know, because I haven't gone on those things, but I'm just
Mhm.
wondering, right? Isn't there something that should, like, there should be some parallel?
Yeah, the standards do talk
Right?
about that, and
Yeah.
that having contracts in place, and then the auditors from the state also go in and periodically, like roughly 6 or so programs a year, they cycle through and make sure that.
I think what Tiffany is asking though is if there are things that you expect the private schools to demonstrate in order to either keep or obtain approved private school
Right.
status,
Mhm.
then we should also be able to contract for the private schools to demonstrate that they are doing
Right.
those same things.
Mhm.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Like,
Love's better.
like provide
Oh, no,
lunch.
If you guys can
That's
only
exactly
audit
what I'm, yeah.
every cycle or so, this
Right.
would mean more audits, really.
Like lunch
that
should
we're
be
getting them.
included. In order to get approved, you should be able to provide lunch.
Should be aligned with
Yeah.
the standards that are
Right.
approved by the state.
Especially for kids who qualify for free and
Right.
reduced
Yeah.
cost
I
lunch.
I would think.
Sorry, because that's.
Well, but that, I just gotta point out, that's a substantive change. There's a lot
That
of
was
concepts that do not
disgusting.
include it.
You don't provide lunch for your children.
And so,
Right, but it should be considered, right? Like, 'cause
well,
we
the
get
question is,
questions.
I mean, one thing is to be considered, it seems to me that's a substantive recommendation we might want to make. That any APSEP must be able to provide food
Yes,
for,
I think we should make that.
yes, that should be. That's why I'm saying I'm wondering if there's
That's
a
a-
parallel
that's
to
a,
that.
that's a totally different, I mean, it's a substantive change and it's
Yeah.
what we ought to,
I'm not arguing pro or con for this, but I'm just saying they don't have access to the federal grants that the LEAs have access to.
They're already
Which is
charging
part
them
of
money in
the
tuition.
complication. It's not as easy an issue as
Well,
you do it or not. There's.
I mean, it clearly would raise costs more.
But they already charging a ton for tuition anyway. So
Well,
And,
how
and
you
the
not
vast
charging?
majority of the schools do provide lunch, so it
Exactly.
gets the other people in line, right?
I don't know whether the vast majority do or don't.
Yes,
I don't know.
I've only got
I don't
requests.
know
for
that. I
one.
don't know that.
It never became an issue, honestly, until this year. This is
This
the
year.
first year,
Yep.
2024, we
Yes.
were asked, why are some schools not providing lunch? And I don't understand why it came up this year.
Well, I think.
Catherine's answer.
I'm livid about it. Because
Yeah.
the response has been a parent who literally said, I can't afford food at the end of a month. And the response is that she's being reimbursed. That doesn't help her, at the end of the month for what she's already output. So it's horrifying that this school knows this is a problem. And yes, the district is handling it, but it's not ideal.
Not nice.
So-
We would have to recommend that the legislature pass legislation requiring all APSEPs to provide lunch.
Do we have any idea of how many of the APSEPs do versus don't have food services right
I've
now?
only had one request this year from one place.
It's the same place.
I don't know. I don't know that.
Now, when you guys audit or make, or department, did these folks get graded? And is that shared with all the LEAs?
So that's a whole presentation in and of itself.
I
I'll give you those.
I don't need that,
I'll give
but
you
it
the
is-
readers digest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
So all the apps, so standards for APSEPs are approved by the State Board of Education, most
Okay.
recently in 2019. And so on a 3 to 5 year cycle of approval, we've run through districts. We roughly are on site between 20 districts, 20 programs a year. And the outcome of that program is either full reapproval, conditional reapproval, which we would be contingencies in 1 year, or they're not approved.
And that is published for the public consumption?
Yes, it's on our website and you can see the status and the report that's written up. There's a preliminary report and then the commissioner issues the approval letter. At that point in time. So there's 3 options that you could be approved for 3, 4, or 5 years before your next visit. And then the conditional approval is 1 year.
Okay.
Or there could be not approved.
Not,
I
Okay,
will
let's,
say there's one consideration that I would make, and I don't know how this would impact, but I'm just thinking about, there's some programs that mainly provide transition services, like out in the community. And I'm just wondering whether it makes sense to mandate that those programs also provide food services. I'm just thinking about that, and it's just something that popped into my head. If we were gonna make that as a recommendation, if you're an APSEP, you have to provide food service to accommodate.
Do we have, we have kids on college campuses that the whole thing about community is you have your own paycheck. You're using that money to buy your own lunch. It's not like we're giving them, they're doing it on their own. It's
Just through their stipend or
They get
something?
stipended for it.
But that's
Yeah, they can
good.
bring
They're
in-
getting money.
We can put that
That should account.
as part of it, right?
well, let me put the question.
Because you didn't. Like,
Carol,
I said, technically, you're giving them a stipend to buy the lunch. You're teaching them how
Well,
to
they're
purchase
working.
lunch.
Well,
You're
they're
working. I would think that would qualify. I don't
But
know.
we have transition in schools like mine, the one I work at, and not everybody gets a stipend either, but everybody, they bring their own lunch or it's provided totally, it's from Bridgeport, like we get Bridgeport lunches.
So is there consensus, make a recommendation that the legislature pass legislation requiring that APSEPs provide lunch, provide food, as part of their programs?
I will say it will increase the cost.
No doubt about that.
Oh, more than what we already
It
said.
shouldn't increase costs
It should not.
for the, I mean, for the most part, because we do think for the most part, people do provide lunch, correct?
I don't have that information. No, I don't
That's-
know.
My information
There's only
is
one.
most don't.
One.
Can you get, I mean, that would be useful for us in this discussion.
And how much more will we be paying in tuition? That's outrageous. We pay astronomical fees.
Well, that's why we're doing this, this whole section.
But really what it
Another
does is
way
like,
to
it
charge-
puts families in the middle and it really impacts low-income families. So-
I mean, would you put a restriction for free reduced lunch students, or I mean, we don't know the number right now. We don't have any idea.
I mean, that is more, I would say.
That's who it's
had-
targeted for, but
No, there's also
Yeah, I
been
think
a
when-
lot of legislative action about not singling out free reduced lunch kids. And that all kids should be
That's
treated
true.
the same. And so the notion of just limiting to free reduced lunch, I think is probably a bad idea.
Well, I think that is an issue though, because so parents have a right and the student has a right to free appropriate public education. So parents shouldn't be charged for, lunch separately, especially when we're talking about if that's part of their, accessing their education. And then you have parents with free and reduced lunch, where if they were in the district, they would be receiving free lunch. They're in another place now. They don't have access to that same federal program, federal funds. So what is the resolution to that issue? And I think you proposed that all APSEPs are required to provide lunch, but that there's still an issue perhaps that there's a resolution perhaps with the federal allocation of those dollars for the student that
that
attends out
goes,
of
that can
district
be part of the
programs.
contract, that money is paid to the receiving.
The APSEP would still have to, because the problem is the district can't, especially the distance, the district can't send food,
Right.
that's not practical. We've resolved some of these situations by providing, consultative support from the surrounding districts for the APSEPs, that the surrounding districts are willing to, provide lunch in those circumstances.
But Brian, even the question, like, if that is what they need to access the faith, like, that should be a question.
It's not a question.
Yeah, but I think,
It's just these circumstances that bring this
Yeah.
issue to
No, I get it.
is, so.
but in
that's-
talking to
that's
different
kind of-
people from the Bureau, that was still like, well, it's not across the board necessarily. I'm like, I think we should agree that it's.
Yeah,
that
and I
food is
think.
part of.
How could you access your education for 7 hours a day? We don't ask workers to do that. You get 30 minutes.
No, of course not, yeah.
But I would want, I would want that message to be.
Or,
But we could bring, I mean, we could
Or-
bring together some people quickly, like there's, in our department, there are folks that oversee those federal grants under John Prasinelli that work on this all day long. That's,
So maybe we should get some input from those folks
I think
about
so.
what the proposed legislation might or could look like.
If you want that, I mean, I can have them bring some more information along those lines to say. And then we could also try to find out how many APSEPs this would impact, work with the CAPSEP on that.
I think that probably makes more sense. It definitely sounds like a problem that needs to be addressed. I just don't want to act
Yeah.
impulsively without information.
Yeah.
Okay, so that issue,
That's
the whole
a to-do for me.
model contract issue, are we going forward with that or not?
I think the model contract language is where some of us are sort of different. Like, what I want is, they should be doing this. And this should be in your contract if you haven't thought of it before. And yes, you can hire legal counsel to find all those things, but that doesn't mean that they're know-it-alls either. It's just the guiding light, guiding principles. All right, they made it past the state, but this could be the 4th year of a 5-year cycle. What if they drop something that they need to have? Like, that's what this was for. This was for helping districts that don't do it all that often, and maybe giving ideas to districts that have done it for a while. I'm like, holy cow, we've never done this before. It's like that. And that's a shared knowledge. You guys can share,
Yeah.
sounds like substantial knowledge.
Okay.
Districts that don't do it all that often.
I just think that maybe there has to be some connection to the approval process because we should be looking at the same standard.
That's true.
And there is some legislative language already about what should be in the contract as a start.
So where are we on that? Are we dropping
Do we
this?
need the legislature to establish a task force to develop a model contract, or do we just need to say,
We will.
we will develop a model contract?
We could say we will.
Well, there's already some language, and then there's the guidelines you use to evaluate.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I think we have a.
Yeah, we have-
Do a task force.
So where are we in terms of recommendations here?
Right, we didn't have a task force to establish the data services MOU or the Youth Service Bureau MOU. That those documents sort of arose out of, there was already language in the statute saying you shall have an MOU, right? And then the agencies took it upon themselves to get together and say, okay, this is what we think should be in it. So I think we're there already. I don't know that we need further legislative action.
So we're gonna drop the model contract piece?
I agree that we will try to work collaboratively to put one in place, not asking the legislature to set up a process to do that, but it will make it happen. Yes?
Yes.
I mean, yeah. we can say
This
about
is
it.
Susan. This is Susan. You're gonna have to ask the legislature to form a work group for that person, that purpose. No?
We just have it for youth service bureaus and just group of us came
Okay.
together and did it.
Yep.
Because it's not gonna be mandated either way, this is just to help, I mean,
Um,
so we are dropping the recommendation.
Okay.
As the legislature actions.
And as to the last recommendation about the auditors examining cost differentials, I prefer to put that on hold at the moment, go through my recommendations and see whether it falls into any of that instead. I think I mean, it's not just cost differentials, it's cost control and all that sort of stuff. And so, and I would propose now that we take a 10-minute break and then we. reestablish.
Whoa, all right, you're right, Jesus.
I'm fine.
I said that we'll get rid of the language.
About a month ago, I sent out a list of some additional recommendations I was making. I'd like to go over them now and see if there's any support for it.
Yeah, you print those out.
Is those printed out, Dawn? If not,
October 21st.
Really?
yeah, I,
I pay more than probably. This would. Dawn, can we just make a few copies and then send out?
right here, two sides.
I can do.
With two
Oh,
sides.
yeah.
My kids, I'm like, thank you. Little baby.
But let me, just making copies of what I actually sent out. But the first issue is, it seems to me that one of the fundamental driving forces in this task force is the fact that we're spending a ton of money on special education, and yet the achievement gap in general between special ed kids and general ed kids is not narrowing. We don't have really good data on that. We don't have data by disability, for example. My proposal was merely to task the department with maintaining and providing that data. I wish we could do more. But, you know, it seems to me that special ed is a remedial program to compensate for the effect of disability on a child, and that in aggregate terms, the gap in reading, the gap in math should be closing because of what we're of our special education initiatives. But it hasn't happened. And it hasn't happened, you know, frankly, during the 50 years that IDEA has been in effect. Before we can actually do something about that, it'd be interesting to see where those gaps are, and perhaps lead us to some further conclusions about what to do about those gaps. Again, I wish we could do more about that. You don't have it. What do you have, Brian, on that?
Yeah, we do collect the data that you're suggesting. So it's indicator 3 for our federal reporting. So there's 3 parts to it. There's 24 data points. It's proficiency for the standard tests, proficiency for the alternate tests, participation rates, and then the gap between students with IEPs and without in reading and math.
So that's
It's all based on the state assessment.
And that's treating all kids with an IEP is the same, right? It's not parsed by disability.
Well, we have all that data. We have all the data by disability category in those contexts.
But you don't publish it. Right?
Right.
Um,
So it's not a new collection for us. We do collect that. We share that with the districts. It appears on their annual APRs. They could see their gap analysis every year in those 2 categories.
and is it accurate to say the gap has not gone down?
The pandemic, there was a significant impact that we're still recovering from. But our accountability index coming out, as for all students. And there's been gains this year, and there will be a presentation at the State Board of Ed tomorrow. But the data, I don't disagree that the data that we have a lot of work to do in our state to close the gaps, for sure. Specifically in math. That's part of the reason why we applied for the state personnel development grant, focused on math instruction for students with disabilities. But we're bouncing back from the pandemic soon, in that context. Yes.
The other thing I was just wondering, and I know you guys have tracked this before, and I don't want to go down a whole nother direction, but I think Andy just brought it up when you talked about the achievement gap. I'm also thinking about the opportunity gap. And I'm thinking about things that we can also track too, even more so about our students and their access to like our CTE programs and dual credit programs, things of that sort. So really not just the achievement, but really looking at opportunities, because I think that's ultimately what we want, is really looking at our kind of our post-secondary outcome goals and really what access our students have, right? So it's achievement one thing, but then also opportunity. And that's something that I think is tracked, or they're tracking it a little bit better. I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, about how many of our students are actually in some of like our CTE programs and things of that sort.
Yeah.
I know that's in that. So just so we're looking at achievement and opportunity.
And can you filter it so you can say the data you have students with dyslexia, taking dual enrollment classes. You can do that.
Yes,
Yeah, but that's probably not possible by district, because we're gonna get numbers that are gonna have asterisks.
right, yeah, the
They do.
suppression rates, yeah,
They
whatever.
do.
Yeah.
But
We share that directly with the districts, but not publicly.
well, how do people feel about this? I mean, I just think that we look sort of foolish if we issue a report and don't talk about this issue.
But it sounds like we already have the data. They're doing
It's not out there though.
Yeah, I mean, it's federally required. So I think, I mean, what I would say is that I think in everything we do, this is our goal. Like, our goal for all of our proposals is to increase the achievement of students with disabilities. So in the way, like, we can provide data in a lot of different ways. Some are required, some aren't, but that is the goal.
Is the
So I think
district
it's like the
required when you
foundation.
share with the districts, is there sunshine? Is the district sharing it out? I mean, I'm on a board of education. I don't remember necessarily seeing.
Yeah,
Or is there a rationale for not sharing it out? I mean, obviously, if it's identifiable, you're not gonna do it, but.
yeah, it's publicly available. So each district receives an annual report every year. All 17 indicators. Office of Special Ed Programs has proposed an 18th indicator this year, so that's like yet to come. But indicator 3, it's a doozy also. The third indicator is all around the achievement and the state assessment. And so we post on the top of the APR, we post the district's prevalence rates and also their performance index for students with disabilities as compared to the state average. So that, you know, the districts, it's data from the year prior, you know, by the time the APR comes out, so there's some context there. But then a district receives a determination if they're meeting requirements, if they need assistance, or they need substantial assistance or intervention. Those are the 4 categories from an accountability standpoint. And so districts do pay attention to that.
And can you extrapolate the gap that Andy's talking about from that data?
So,
Because I mean, it doesn't sound like we need anything extra. We have this, but I just
I
want to
just
make sure.
think that if we hold value in those data assessments, we have to be careful. I'm just being honest with
it's a
you.
state assessment.
It's
Yeah.
a state assessment, and those are one metric that doesn't necessarily talk about overall achievement per se. So I'll be honest with you, I think that in some districts, you're gonna see the disparity, even just in general education, what the achievement is, the overall achievement is, and special education, where it's not good in some places. So I don't know if that's really our measure. Our measure, at least in my mind, is really making sure that we know that we're gonna be working on achievement. And I'm trying to break down the ceilings and making sure that our kids are getting the same opportunities, right? And that's the reason why I'm pushing on things like CTE and that metric, because right now, the measure for me would be how many of our kids are actually, you know, we're making gains, right, and on academic gains, but how many of our children ultimately, when it comes time for them in preparation for high school, how many of our students actually have access? And we don't have much access, let's be honest.
But that data is also available.
That data is available. I'm just saying is what do we believe in, right? Like, what do we value? If we wanted to put some sort of a metric there, I don't know if I would hold weight in a state assessment, right?
Versus object.
But that's the data that's readily available. So
Right,
if
but
we're
that's
not gonna
readily
use
available
That
too.
data, what else would we use?
We have CTE data available.
I'm sorry, CTE is what now?
Technical education.
I'm just saying like even that, or like, you know, how many of our students are receive access to college dual enrollment courses, things of that sort.
Well, the national,
I mean,
the
anytime-
other data is the national assessment, which is, you know, showing a growing gap.
I mean, anytime that you're talking about accountability, we need an assessment that's across all districts. It's similar for our accountability, which OSIP uses NAEP, which we have very little oversight on.
Right.
So there's pros and
Yeah.
cons, but it is something we already do. So I don't think it needs to be legislated, but.
But it's not publicly facing on its site. People would have to.
It
know
is.
they
It
get
is.
It is.
Yeah, it's, if you go
Look what
into.
Andy's asking.
Well, if you're asking, we don't put a breakdown by every disability category for that on the annual report, but we have those data.
Yeah.
But are you?
So we could
legislating?
recommend that you put that on the public facing website.
It's on that site.
Not by
Liability.
disability.
Early
cap.
classification.
Is the private, is it in the private one though?
Private
Version of
schools,
the ed site, the
secure.
non-public, the secure.
we
sorry.
have all of the data. So it's available.
So again, the question is, so is the reason why it's not being made available to that degree, is there a concern about identifying? I mean, assuming that.
Sure, yeah, I mean, that's part of it, but. I mean, it's, yeah,
So
there's federal requirements around what's posted, you know, accessible to the public and what it, you know, so.
it's sort of a shame that you got away with DRGs, which allowed you to group it and get enough data on some of
Still using
the.
contract negotiations,
Yes, we
even though they
do.
don't
No, yes, we
exist
do.
anymore.
Yes, we do.
They need, we should still have them. Nice way to compare a lot of things.
It is, but they're gone. Do you know the thought behind elimination of those?
They just sort of seem to disappear.
Yeah.
Again, they still
Right?
use them.
A long time ago.
Yeah.
And the
Wait, by the way.
things have changed in different.
Well,
times.
I think Lisa, you revised them, right, Lisa?
Yeah, we update them periodically. We use the same methodology that the State Department of Education
Is it on your website?
is.
All right.
Well,
Thank you.
as a group that way, but I would really like to see this data grouped by DRG and by disability, because, I'm not gonna get, on small districts, I'm not gonna get the number of kids, designated with a speech impairment who are, falling behind in math. I mean, it's just,
I think in the smaller districts, it's very dangerous to put anything out by district.
it
Because
is.
you can't, I mean, in my district, you can't, we have one kid in transition. I think last year was one, I think we have two this year in our transition.
I'm just trying to figure out like our point. And I'm not saying that in a way that we know that there's a gap that exists. I don't know necessarily if we know that people can access it now, so I don't think there's anything else we need to do. I think that everything that we're writing in the report gets to what are the things that we think are going to improve overall achievement. So I don't know if we necessarily need to put anything else out there because it's accessible, right? And I think that there's danger in if you try to publicize something without context. It just doesn't, I don't know, for me, I don't know if it really makes a difference. We could just say, oh, this is this. If that's the case, then we're gonna put it up there for, people of color. Look at this. We still have the same group. We see the achievement gap forever in Connecticut. So we've been talking about gaps forever, right? And we're done with it talking about achievement gap. Like, where's the opportunities? How do we get enough achievement to get an opportunity, right? Break down the glass ceiling, whether it's a student with disabilities, whether it's children of color, et cetera, et cetera. I just don't know if that's going to get us anywhere except for people to say, oh, well, there we go again. There's a big gap. I don't know. We've been talking about it forever.
Well, okay. I would also be very interested in knowing whether the gap is diminishing in DRG Group A and increasing in DRG Group I. Right? I mean, that's, I think that the equity issue plays into that as well.
I just think the achievement is overall bad in some places.
I think the achievement.
I think the sentiment
just
of
overall
the
achievement
proposal is
not
perfectly
good.
fine, but to me, it doesn't sound like it's
It's not gonna add
worth,
value.
not with the other stuff we have, that we
Okay.
really want to get through.
So let's move on. That's
Only a loud voice, it doesn't matter if I said that.
the second proposal there has to do with oversight of absence. We do have a situation now where the state does the approval, but doesn't do frequent monitoring of absence. Locals, districts, in some cases, place and forget, in other cases, monitor. We do have a growing ownership of absence by private equity firms with diminishment of services. This is a proposal that would provide a $100 per student placed fee on absence that would fund a unit that would oversee on a frequent basis what absence are doing, work to create some sort of transportation clearinghouse so the districts can reduce transportation costs by working together. you know, and do some of the monitoring of the costs as well of absence.
That cost is just gonna get sent back to the
Right.
sending district.
Yeah,
It's not-
except that
so
$100.
it's- So the $100 to them is just gonna get tacked on.
It's a tax on local districts.
It'll just go right to the local district.
Yep.
pay for more.
Yes, yep.
I also did,
Maybe record.
Sorry, not even.
I do disagree or push back on the first sentence also.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I can even say it, Brian, but
Yeah.
the planning and policing team has the responsibility to monitor the quality of each student's IEP. And that consists of the local district and the team, family. I mean, I'm not sure how somebody from the State Department of Ed could come in and look at little Johnny's program and say, oh, that's exactly what it should be. That's the charge of the.
Except that they do that all the time. Every complaint investigation is that.
And, you know, in my
The student
experience,
level.
is that, you know, the review, there's an annual review and that's it.
That's not true. I mean, that's part of our process, but if we do on-site visits.
Oh, no, I'm
if
not
there's
talking about
any-
you, I'm talking about local districts. That the local special ed director, you know, so many of them have told me, I would love to go visit those.
I started doing visits, and based on some of the stuff that
Yeah.
Michelle had, we have our own thing, our out-of-district team, we came up with our own little thing, and we're gonna be coming to an out-of-district near you. So honestly, we're already doing that.
There are
Seriously, we're
districts.
doing our own oversight.
I don't think most districts are.
Oh, I don't know, I've been doing this since.
There are.
Visits well before all of this.
Is there a possibility either with the risks or some risks, I forget that, that is shared? Like, we don't all have students in the same places, but if we have the state saying this is an improved program, but maybe they're not coming back because it was really good for 5 years, but we have more current stuff, it would be nice if superintendents or special ed directors have data that they could look at that they didn't say it's like, you know, the Bible, but they can say this is a peer and I could call them up and say, we're thinking about using them. Looks like you just recently had a visit there. That doesn't cost any money, but allows people to share that data.
I'll be honest with you, I think Senate districts should go, they're their kids.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree.
I mean, they're still our kids.
How many out-of-district placements do you have?
A
Not
lot.
kids, but how many schools?
Okay, I don't know off the top of my head, to be honest.
Dozens, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's some that I'm definitely, like the ACES ones, we've already started doing some of those, but we go regularly. We have a team who's actually gonna go out. I just met with our out-of-district team. They're going out 3 times a year, and then myself and the out-of-district coordinator are also going to make sure that we're going out in addition to them going out. But we have things that we're gonna be looking for when we go out. There are kids, honestly, you know, there are kids. We still go to their graduation. Some people don't even do that. And I'm not saying that in a disrespectful way, but there are kids. If you're an out-of-district placement, it's still my kid.
Could you imagine any districts that might, for power struggle reasons or whatever, not let directors go out and visit? Like, do we have to have language in there saying, we can't say they must, obviously we should say they should, but people should be checking out. the
I think most of
already
them have been
legislation
fine.
against
They're
So
okay.
like superintendents can't say no.
No, most people just let you do,
They're
Even
very
the ones that
open.
don't
I don't
come
see
by
that
lunch.
as a problem.
even though.
Okay. So that's best practice, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, if our kids
Well,
are
it's
there.
part of the
they-
condition
There
of
is-
being an approved private special education
Yeah.
program.
Yeah,
There
you
are
have to-
non-approved schools that do not let districts visit.
We don't recommend students going with us.
Yeah, but we're talking about the apps that are approved. And they
Yeah.
they have to allow visits.
I don't think we have to charge $100 for this team. I think.
Well, I mean, you know, telling the state to do more in that area, the answer we're gonna get is we don't have.
They don't have enough people to do that. The
That's right.
state can't do that. And what people do they have?
Well, but let's put
Oh, do
the,
you
let's,
have people? Sorry, I was trying to.
yeah, let's put capacity aside for a minute. So what I always ask is, so let's look at our local school districts. Like, how are we monitoring our local school districts? Now, students who are placed out, they're higher intensive. You know, they're not within the neighborhood districts, but are we asking the approved privates to go through processes that we're not asking
Right.
the in-district local school to do? We're responsible to monitor and approve, which we do. That doesn't mean that there wouldn't be an issue in that school that we need to follow up on. And that a random site visit would catch that issue. So it's not a way to address, I'm just trying to get at what we're trying to address here. If we had 50 people, what would we want those 50 people to do? You know,
Yeah, I don't think it's necessary. I think we should encourage local schools to really follow their kids. I mean.
we are working on guidance, you know, based on some of the issues that occurred, you know, during the last and some of the investigations that happened over the last couple of years to put guidance out exactly on responsibilities that the LEAs have, responsibility that the state has, and the responsibility that the school has, so that there's no misinterpretation. You know, what does it mean to be approved? You know, and what's our responsibility for monitoring? We do include APSEPs in our monitoring cycle. So the unannounced random on-site visits we did last year. But, you know, there are 84 programs. So there's, you know,
You don't catch it or not.
yeah, it's not a way, it's, you know, we all are accountable and we all have roles to ensure the students are receiving the services that they need.
Well, this obviously came in large part out of the OCA report on High Road.
Okay.
Where there was sort of finger pointing, you know, with the state saying it was up to local districts to review what local districts were relying on state approval.
We didn't point, yeah, we responded formally to that. I don't think we were pointing our finger at districts. I wouldn't put it that way, but districts do have a responsibility, much like Karen described in the PPT process. So we all share oversight. That doesn't mean a restraint may happen inappropriately in that place because it's approved. We're not going to get at that issue. If we do a random on-site visit, we're not going to get at that issue. It's a collaborative, you know, we need structures in place to make us aware and make sure the programs are aware and the students are, you know, receiving the education that they need to. Especially for students that don't have voice, especially for the high needs population, which our advocacy agencies, you know, are tasked to support. So there's work to be done, but that's why we do a lot and we have revised quite a bit in the last few years on these processes. But
I do think that.
we're always open to ideas.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, I think that guidance would be helpful. And
Yeah.
that, you know, as an approved private, I think, things have changed since COVID.
Mhm.
You know, I think I can say at my school, fewer districts come out, to visit, and fewer districts come to, annual reviews. But,
Yeah, with the onsite of the virtual PPP
Right,
meetings. Too,
right,
that's-
and that works for many families too, who
Right.
are working and they don't have to travel to the school. So I'm not necessarily being, critical about that, but I think having that guidance, will be helpful. I do think, and I don't know that we need legislation, but I was also gonna say, Andy, that I think the issue of transportation and, you know, is there a way to, have some kind of, I think Amy Turner brought this up at, one of the task force meetings, maybe the one at ACES, I think. Is there a way to have some kind of repository statewide, for example, on who's got folks going where and how can we, you know, I try to do that in my microcosm. If I have a district that's near another district that's sending a student, I'll say, why don't you talk to this person in the district? And as long as, you know, in terms of behavioral needs, the students are a good match. I think that's helpful. But if there was a way to maybe create that system so that it didn't necessarily rely on me saying, oh, that's right, you know, but there was a way that people could access that information readily. It doesn't seem like there's any violation of privacy in that, because it would just be.
Anonymous.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, I mean, there are three sub-issues here that I want to talk about. One is that transportation clearinghouse. And is that something?
Transportation CT said. Accessible to all.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Sorry.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
Keep going.
have to make a recommendation in that regard.
For transportation?
To have some sort of system whereby districts can find out that there are other districts that are sending kids to the same or nearby schools, where they can share transportation costs.
ACES has that. We do regional transportation right now with them. They do it.
But not all do. And you
But not
apply
all do,
involved.
but I'm just saying there's a model that's out there for regionalization of transportation for school districts. So there's about 6 of us who share. So for instance, we're all going to Highlands or all going to Hope Academy. ACES actually does the regional transportation right now. So it may be something to encourage residents to engage and use ACES as a model because they've been doing it now for, God, maybe 4 or 5 years.
But ACES is actually providing the transportation, like it's not a
Yeah.
clearinghouse of information about private companies that are serving between local districts and APSEPs right now.
No, but I think they have subcontracted at some point in time. So I think they are the ones who actually they're not using like all their van drivers per se. They actually use other companies to do that.
They do, yeah.
Yeah. They're not just using.
But districts also
Huh?
contract the individual, transportation.
Yeah, we do both.
Would not be part of that system at all, right?
That's true.
Right.
But this could be I mean, going back to, not like I want to push it again, but like the model contract, like this is usually the questions you ask when you're looking to use the service, right? Can you let me know if there are new superintendents or special ed directors I should be calling because someone from their district is also attending within a 20-mile radius or something, whatever makes sense financially, because I look at this as a Board of Ed member and it's just, the costs are just
Yeah, sure.
astronomical for one student who needs that education where they're going, but to get to there, it seems like, what is this going on? There's
Right.
gotta be other kids who are passing through our.
Well, it's not just to one school. It's-
No, I
Right, there
understand.
might be other neighboring schools
Neighboring
that I don't
schools,
have access to,
yes.
you know, I don't know that there's somebody coming.
And so I think we need, questions whether we need to proposal for a bigger system or whether we recommend that the rest set up such a system, but I do think that some sort of clearinghouse system is needed. And, I don't think it just runs to the APSEP to do that. You don't have anybody near you, do you, Karen?
Well, we have Bennhaven Academy.
Yeah.
We do have, I mean, there are other schools in Wallingford, other private privates in Wallingford. You know, start times, it might be a little different, but it's still, I think it's still valuable because it may work for.
Yeah, it's valuable information to have for sure. But to your point, just back into my director days,
Yeah.
even on the other side of town, in my own town, disrupts
Yeah.
pickup times and
Right,
drop
right.
off times.
Good, yeah.
So if you're talking about multiple towns, it's tricky.
That's why I wouldn't be mandated.
It's gotta be like
It needs to
right
information.
on the way. Because
But-
10 minutes could really throw off.
Right, it's good, yes.
But having more information would
Yeah, absolutely.
lead towards some savings,
Yeah.
maybe not huge.
Yeah.
And how do we get that information? How do we get that information system created? Do we make a
Without creating a
recommendation?
cost that exceeds.
Could it
the
be
benefit.
embedded in CT sets?
Well, we
No
have,
way.
we would have the students who are outplaced in the system, the students, assuming they would need transportation. Like, we don't have any transportation data in there now. But it's the repository for all the placements and the students as a starting point. Then it would be a matter of some districts own their own, others contract out. Right. I know people have approached us on this before and have worked at it. I haven't seen a finished product, for whatever reason, but it's not a new concept.
Is it possible, I'm just spitballing here, Brian, I don't know if I'm like asking them to create another module seems like a pipe dream, but is it possible to create a space to record, like who's providing the transportation for districts to input and then somehow upon inquiry, be able to provide that information to directors that within your 20-mile radius, there are X number of districts transporting to that school, your own companies that they're using.
Yeah, technology wise, it's absolutely possible.
But it is, but I think that the part of this is the coordination of that. That's what ACES does right now, is they coordinate it. Because even if I find out as a director that you have folks that are coming through, there has to be some level of coordination, and that's the piece that they're doing right now.
I think that would be more of like a mandate to the RESCs that they must develop a transportation collaborative system. Some RESCs are not even providing, programming, so I don't know how that we get to that point where we're mandating that they provide transportation collaboratives.
Our rest representative,
I know that at various rests, this has been attempted over the years, and, you know, to Brian's point with some of the challenges, I know both at ESCON and at Craig, I think some of the others have tried, and a few challenges present. One is, just because there's a certain number of seats on the van doesn't mean that those seats can be filled by particular students, and I think sometimes you have business managers or somebody in a room saying, oh, if we just put the 5 kids in the van, it's gonna cost us. And the reality is you can put 2 of the wrong kids in a van and it
All
just
that
doesn't
happens.
No. And so without more identifying information, when you're putting kids on a spreadsheet, it's hard to be
Yeah, to give
able
them
to do that without those individual conversations.
No, that's true. That's a really good point, because you're right.
I think people sometimes like boil this down to like, oh, well, we have this many seats, like we can definitely cut the cost of this. And then Brian's point, even going across town or to 2 schools that have different start times, now a student is missing 15 or 20 minutes because their drop-off time is delayed because they can't get off at this APSA or they're sitting in a van. So I think there are particular challenges that make it more complex than just inputting information onto a spreadsheet. And saying, oh, we can collaborate.
It works out for ACES only because not only for the regionalization, but even for their programs, because they provide everything in their own programs.
Yeah.
They're picking up kids from all over the place.
so are you suggesting that this whole effort, is it worth the effort?
I think in particular cases, for particular districts, it can be hugely beneficial. Like if there's 3 kids going to Abscess in Wallingford and Karen's able to make that connection for a district, I think it makes a lot of sense if they're using the same transportation provider. I just don't think it's a one size fits all, create a spreadsheet and this is gonna solve the special
No,
ed
and
costs.
information is just the first step.
Yep.
But I think, you know, we've made the point several times today that having the information is the first step.
Yep.
So how do we create a system where the information is available and then directors have a chance
Yep, can
at being
call-
able to
yep.
solve the problem?
Again, a starting point. I mean, they can't do anything outside of, knowing who's going where.
So, you know, we can make a recommendation, to ask somebody to do this. Who do we task to do this?
Well,
Design
if
something.
it's something like Michelle proposed, that would be, us within the CT system to create some type of a repository that would have a report of out-of-district placement, location, and transportation companies.
Done.
You just bought yourself another assignment.
Okay, yeah, that one. Let's move.
Here to help.
Let's move to cost control, which obviously is something there's a lot of pressure on. The finance group,
Which number?
Where are you on 3?
no, this was part of 2, but I'm breaking down what the tasks of that group would have been had there been a group. I do want, so the finance group talked about asking public auditors to do that. Which is obviously a possibility, although I'm not sure how much they're involved. My own feeling is that, we have states that do set rates for APSEMs. That involves, a band of auditors and accountants to do that, obviously. And, what I also point out is that similar programs in Massachusetts where there are cost controls are actually more expensive than schools in Connecticut are. And so I'm not sure that that's necessarily an answer to cost control. But I also do think that we as a task force have to say something about controlling the cost of it. And what do we say? And are the public auditors the ones to do that? And what powers are we giving them?
So can we hear from the funding task force about the reason for the recommendation that the state auditor undertake that task?
If someone else remembers, Lisa's still on?
No, she.
All right.
She's away from her keyboard.
I have to tell you, I don't honestly remember the discussion. that we had.
Lisa's
Lisa
back.
back.
Lisa's back.
So Lisa. How did we arrive at the auditors should be the ones to look at the costs, the varying costs of services among the private providers.
If my memory serves me correctly, we had a conversation about excess cost and the volatility in the reimbursement requests from districts. And the spike in the deficit or the underfunding of the excess cost grant in the last fiscal year was largely driven not by a significant change in the number of students that districts are asking for reimbursement to support, but rather the cost of those outplacements. And so we were questioning, and we just had a conversation with regards to why those costs might have increased so dramatically year after year. And then we were just brainstorming that there's not a lot of data. There's not a lot of information that we can look at to try to analyze or to get a good handle as to why the costs may have increased. We don't know if it's because of an increase in need of the students. And so we were just trying to find a way to get some more information to help with the analyzation of reimbursement requests under the excess costs. And the auditors in the past have done some reports and have looked at the outplacement providers in the past. So that's why I think that we recommended that it go to the auditor specifically.
So Andy, you're proposing that the State Department of Education.
No, I'm not, you know, the proposal was to have this group and they could look at that, but not set rates. And, you know, the auditors is another possibility to look at it. What'd you say, 88 programs, Brian? 88 APSEPs?
84.
84 APSEPs. And I assume it's a quite significant task to actually look at one of those, determine what the cost elements are and how you got to that cost, right? It's very complicated.
Well, the needs of the students will drive the
Yeah.
costs in certain ways.
Right.
You know, I think, some of the funding that was available to school districts during the pandemic to increase teacher salaries, for example, was not available to approved privates. And so, you know, we need to pay our teachers competitively so that they want to work at approved privates. So that increases costs, same for paraeducators. You know, so it's not just that the cost of tuition is going up, but we pay the same thing that school districts pay for, like health insurance and workers' compensation insurance and all of that, and that's going up for everybody. So I think that's reflective in the increase in costs for approved privates. I have a question about this examining cost differentials between various private providers. Is that because you expect approved privates to be the same, have the same tuition rates?
I think the discussion that prompted that language was around a sense from some superintendents, for example, or special ed directors, that students with very similar needs were incurring costs that were very different, sometimes within the same private provider, as well as across providers. Yeah. And again, you know, that's.
So it isn't to set rates, even though I personally believe in single fare system. It would be to see what's the range and who's an outlier.
Yeah.
And yeah, every kid is different,
Right.
but like this is data. We're not mandating that anyone close anybody down or anything like that.
No, I agree with you. I think really being able to get the information is helpful to see, you know, who's out there and what's out there and what's the range.
What's the information? I mean, do we want a chart of what we're spending for each kid to be an outplace?
So the contracts do have to include, a statement about what the tuition includes. Administrative.
Right, but we're not doing it across, we're not doing comparison there, we're not having a spreadsheet
No.
saying, you know, following the 6,000 kids have been outplaced and here's what each one of them costs. And here's the services they get.
So why are we not doing that? I thought that's the essence of this when we were having the discussion, to really kind of see who's paying what for what, right?
That is the proposal.
Isn't that the proposal?
That is the.
Well, that's not
That is-
exactly the proposal, but that's, we could make
That
it
is
as a
the
proposal.
Oh, that's how I read that.
I suppose, I mean, that seems to be a huge task.
If there's 84, we can't see what the actual tuition rate, even if we don't parse it out even further by each service. You could say, oh, this, out of the 84, this is the range. For, oh, this tuition is this and this is this. And then that may lead us to further questions. Don't know.
Who would this information be available to?
Who with the information?
Let's say an APSEP has had outplaced kids. And tuitions charged to districts vary between $85 and $125.
More than that.
But I'm quite, so
For
let's,
this example,
just for
For this
example,
example.
what does that tell us? And
well, it wouldn't be just that, right? We already sort of been told
Right.
contracts will detail what is underlying those costs.
And I would like to see the range. Right? I would like to see the
what value is the range unless you know the level of services being provided?
The value would be to see whether or not, if we're coming back to see if there are folks who are truly outliers, why is it that this particular place is charging this versus this one for a kid with a similar profile? At some point in time, there has to be, and superintendents know this, directors of special education, if there's that much of a variance in cost, and I don't know that to necessarily exist, that would be good information for us to know.
If what's happening that we're trying to combat here is the takeover of school in Connecticut by private equity firms, then isn't what we're concerned about that there is a profit motive at work here?
Right.
Aren't we really concerned that the tuition is going up and that extra money that school districts are paying is going to profit rather than to service?
Yep.
Right?
Yes.
So how do we get a handle on whether or not that's happening? Because I think we're concerned about that, and I think we would like to disincentivize that.
Right.
Right?
That can be part of the approval process,
Right.
is that only a certain percentage can be, I don't know how you say the CEO.
Well, the first thing is to shine a light on it.
Right.
That's-
We don't even
I
have
do
the
feel like this is,
Yeah, me
right?
too.
Like if we aren't asking the right questions about specific deviations of, all right, psychology costs this much, food costs this much, et cetera, like. No kid, if that will be always the response, right? Every kid's needs are different. And of course, that's true. But we get evaluated as school systems. And every single one of our kids has different needs. So I don't see why the data by itself can't at least be utilized to shine a light. And if we find that there are some
Right.
for-profits that are really for-profits, and they're
Yeah.
not going to paying the teachers a more, a competitive wage, so they get the best teachers, the best psychologists, then I think we have a right to know that. I think we have a right to know where the money, I know it's fungible, I know they can put it under different titles, but that is what
I think that's
we
what-
auditors for.
I think it's an incredibly complicated process, and also that there's access.
But why do you feel it's incredibly?
If we're giving them money,
Well, I mean,
Well, that's every right.
so for,
You can't just find out straight tuition, 84, this is
you
this.
can find straight tuition. You can find the kind, I suppose we could have a module in CT Sense, which talks about how much each out-district placement costs. And, that could be accessible, I suppose, to special ed directors, that we have, 50 kids placed at X school in the range of two.
That won't tell you whether or not
It won't tell you
50% of the tuition is going to profit,
It would not tell you that.
right? So I think that's what we're really talking about here. I would rather see the state auditor have the responsibility. I think they're best equipped to audit and
That's
tell
the
us
idea.
whether or not there is a profit margin that we're paying for.
And we might need an in-depth review of special ed service providers on issues such as exorbitant executive salary. I mean, that's where you see it. It's not going towards the kids. it's
You would
their
see it
salary.
in administrative costs
Yep.
potentially, and you would also
They're
see
gonna
it
get those
in
dollars.
Jeez.
shareholder dividends.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
Or if we're
it's a public
saying
corporation.
we're spending $125 an hour on occupational therapy services. And, we can itemize all the services that the kids are getting. We can itemize the overhead costs. And we're still paying $20,000 a kid above and beyond that, right? What's that $20,000 for?
That's the idea. I mean, I don't think when we did this, we expected every single one of them to be audited every single year.
No.
But there's gotta be some sort of rotation, but if people know it's coming, then maybe they'll start
Also
adjusting, accordingly. But we need this data. And we can't control costs without having a knowledge of the
that's
costs and where they're going. So that's what this is for. So it's a crazy ask. My hope would be the auditors would be honest and say like, what you're asking for is I can do one a year. I don't think that's true, but that would be better than nothing.
I think it's a massive job to do 1 year.
Then that's a massive job. I mean, we.
And I
need
also,
this.
I also think we would need legislation to require APSEPs to open their books.
Right,
I
I
think
think
they'll
that's
probably-
why this recommendation is being made.
Yeah, I just don't understand where the disconnect is. Like, we want there to be, if they're getting our money, it's state money, they have to open their books to us. If they don't want to open their books to us, they're welcome to be not approved. Like, I don't even know why we couldn't open the books right now because they received state money. I don't understand.
They submit their budgets to us.
Right, but if we wanted to go line item and
Right.
whatnot, they would have to, I would assume. Give it a proprietary.
It's a private entity. I mean, yeah, so. Depends on the purpose, I guess, and in the context,
The
obviously.
purpose is, yeah, shining the light on where this money goes, and if it's all totally appropriate, and then we just know it's really expensive to have special education, but I have a feeling that if more for-profits are coming in, we need to guard against that. And they can say no to our suggestion.
Well, the proposal would have to be elaborated to guarantee that becoming an APSEP in the future, you'd have to have your books open, and then we'd have to be pretty specific about what that meant. And, Michelle talked about private equity, which is a matter of great concern to me, but there's also, that there are a lot of not-for-profits that are wasteful and have exorbitant
Right.
administrative costs and all that sort of
That's
stuff.
when we want to see those
That's true.
outliers.
I mean, it's not just private equity guys.
No, that's true.
That's why we want to see outliers. And it could be that outlier has a kid with incredible special needs just diagnosed with X and a lot of other kids are, but that kid is unique because that is gonna happen sometimes. But like, again, without the data, and I agree, we can make it part of the renewal process.
Mhm.
And that the auditor has, they know 5 years out who's up next, and that can be part of the process of how they get approved.
And the other concern I have, which has happened in the last year, is that private equity comes in, maintains existing contracts and cuts service.
Well, that would come out in this process.
Well, after the fact, yeah.
I'm wondering if we want to specify an audit cycle.
It could be collaborative with the cycle of approval. I mean,
Yeah,
I
I
don't know,
like
we can
trying
do whatever
to-
we want to do.
How often do they get reapproved?
The APSEPs between 3 to 5 years, but the state auditors now that go in they typically run through about 6 programs a year or 7.
But they don't do this sort of audit.
They're doing what's required legislatively now.
And where is it possible to like get that email to us, like what's required now and see what
Sure.
we think might need to be added to make it a full picture?
Sure.
Lisa has her hand up.
I'm muted. I just have a question. So like, I'm guessing that SDE, or I'm wondering if SDE already has a lot of data on the charges by student, by disability that they could make publicly available, that can just shed a little bit more light on these outplaced tuition charges that districts are receiving every year? Because it's not just, I mean, getting to the audit of like whether or not providers are turning a profit, I think that we were just more generally concerned with just the lack of transparency and the lack of publicly available data generally. So I'm wondering if SDE already collects some information that can be then made publicly facing, so that those superintendents who question charges and want to compare their charges as compared to other districts, that they would have more information readily available to them.
Right.
Do you know what the District A pays for placement of a student?
Well, we have
B and-
excess cost data that's submitted to us from the districts.
Okay, that is
We don't,
fine.
the districts don't report to us by student, like they're each individual contract that they have.
But if you're seeking excess costs,
Yeah,
would
we have that data.
that be 10 students are outplaced and here's what their cost is, or no?
No, they're each
Student by
submitted
student.
individually.
And the cost would be
It's not broken down.
Tuition plus transportation.
It's every, could be
Total
Yeah.
cost of the.
total cost, transportation,
Right.
tuition.
And if it's not broken down more than that, then I mean, there's a ton of reasons why justifiably there would be a huge range in that kind of grouping. That's why we want.
I'm not crazy about the idea of publicizing individual student costs. I think
Neither am
that's a.
Oh, no.
That's gonna be a problem.
But I do think if this information, so if we specified an audit cycle tied to the approval cycle, if we said the state auditors, like every school has to be audited once every 5 years, tied to its approval with the Bureau. And that information needs to be made publicly available upon completion. Would that solve the issues that we're
How
talking
do
about?
rests fall into this though? Arrests, they're not considered in the.
They're not a
in aids-
private,
they're not
well,
private.
unless they're contracted, you know, for
That's what I'm
certain
saying.
related services potentially in that context.
So then that's why I'm trying to figure out how the rests, fall into this cycle too.
All right, well, one problem at a time. Let's talk about.
Well, I'm just saying, if we're gonna
Come back,
do
put a
it, we'll
pin
come
in that,
back.
Tiffany.
No problem. I'm just wondering.
Are we comfortable with that, or is there a reason not?
I just wonder what the
It's not-
cost
it's not
of doing these
really
audits would be.
great.
It would be spectacular.
Sunlight's good on everything.
I don't understand why we're saying it's so important that we need to have it done. But we don't want to task the state auditor with doing it regularly.
Let them come back and say it costs too much and it's unreasonable. That doesn't mean we shouldn't recommend it.
Well,
If we
but it's,
think- Having it done is important.
we only should recommend it, the cost of doing it is
We've got a
substantially
lot of
less than the
things in here
savings.
that I don't think there
Yeah.
is a snowball's chance in hell
Right.
is gonna get funded, so
Exactly.
why should this be any different?
Of what.
So it's
That's the spirit.
Question.
It's important.
But I'm just saying, is it, as opposed to us going the step of looking at, auditors and things of that sort, couldn't we just get, like in some of these other areas, just get some initial information to really unpack it further?
We
Right?
have to legislatively mandate that. There's no way to get this information.
Oh,
without
really?
sending somebody in who has audit power to do it.
So you said the auditors currently get a budget, just a huge overall budget of the entity. Is that?
No, I was speaking about the excess cost reimbursement, maybe if that's what
I'm
you're
just
referring
saying,
to.
how can we
When,
just
when
get-
the auditors go in, it's pretty thorough, I don't know.
Yeah, I haven't, we did it the first year, so I haven't. done it for a
But they're
long time.
examining all aspects.
Sorry,
of
not auditor then. You said they submit their budget.
The the districts submit their overall costs.
For excess.
Yeah, for excess costs,
Okay.
but
So
But I mean,
again, like, if we can get that of what they're getting now, it could be that's already
Right.
giving you some of the information, and then we can say, well, really, we also need this stuff.
Yeah.
But
And
that's-
see how much it
right.
adds to their,
Because I'm just wondering, just from Michelle's point, like, I don't know if we have to make a legislative change and just say, okay, we go through this approved private special education program, this is the tuition for this one, like, just the initial start of that. We have to ask for legislation to get that information. Most of the times we have that information.
you have that information.
That's what I'm saying.
You're
like-
just asking for what is the tuition to your school?
It's the audit part, because, yeah,
Right. I know the audit is the second piece
That
of it,
doesn't
but I'm
get us
saying, like-
nearly far enough.
No, it doesn't. No, but I'm saying like, even around the table, it may be in a, what in the world? I don't know if everyone has a handle of the range of what we actually charge. I'm not sure. Maybe that.
there's not a one-stop shop
Right.
of tuition.
That's what
by
I'm saying,
APSA,
right.
Kind of like the Massachusetts.
Like
template
some of
that
us who are in it,
Excel
no, but
shows.
I don't know if everyone is that, right?
And the auditors do, that's part of what there is in their report, is
Yeah.
the tuition costs.
and that's already,
Some
that's already
APSEPs,
there.
yeah, some APSEPs charge by service, others charge a flat tuition.
Oh, I see.
That's-
So that even-
that's
it's not
included-
apples to apples,
that's in-
sort of.
That's
No.
included, but it's not necessarily.
yeah.
You're going to do this for the APSEPs. We probably ought to do the same thing for transportation.
Transportation companies cost.
Well, I mean, we get all sorts of wildly varied rates for transporting a kid from one school, from one town to another, to a school.
That
Sometimes
could be
on
based on
access.
whether they need their
I'm-
their own
I'm
transportation.
asking
or they could
questions.
be with Another, is it that?
Well,
is that-
part of it, it's
Even level 12.
it's liability, it's distance, it's all sorts of things.
These kids can survive another day.
But we know that except for the rest, all the transportation is provided by for-profit companies. and if we're concerned about excess, profits, you know, it seems to be transportation is a primary to look at. I mean, we have lots of cases where an outplaced kid transportation costs more than tuition costs.
We don't wanna make them mad though.
Many
We
cases.
we need to keep them happy, because or else they're gonna. We barely have enough as evidence. We should be done.
That's true of APSEPs as well,
I know.
Kathy.
If you have that same concern about the profit.
All right, and then the third issue I have related to APSEPs here is reporting of restraint and seclusion, which, you know, we see wildly different numbers that don't seem to be consistent with at least my experience of who the schools are.
What number are you on?
It's not on here.
Oh.
It's a bonus round. Hey, no whammies.
On this one.
Well, there's something I'm afraid
We have
exclusion later
trying
on.
to scratch off 3, 4.
Brian, what,
Yeah, I'm.
do you do anything to,
We've officially been here too long.
Yeah, side of the table, we're losing it over.
We're just making more fun. That's all we're doing.
Fun.
Sorry.
Fun. I like saying.
when you get you question restraint and seclusion numbers at all that you get from, particularly APSEP?
Yeah,
Yes.
What's that process involve?
I can speak from experience.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
And then I'll-
so, if you have I don't know what the percentage is, but
20.
if there's 20, okay. Increase or decrease in seclusion and restraints, you're required to provide an explanation for that.
Justification.
Justification, yeah, yeah.
It's based on the data justification, so then we do that, that's actually a federal requirement also, so then there's a change in N or percentage, whether it's an increase or a decrease. But we talked a little bit about restraint and seclusion last time about auditing, you know, the potential for randomly looking deeper into the reports, for example, that are being reported to us and making that part of our cohort cycle. But we do.
Towards the state or also the other day?
The state, I don't know whether we
The
send that
LEAs.
information to the state, I don't know what they do.
No, I just didn't know, like, if there's seclusion of certain for that one kid,
Yes.
like, is there communication
Oh,
immediately with
yes,
the
the
district?
district
Okay.
has that.
Yeah, that's part of the requirement, but then
Okay.
overall.
Yeah.
But that, you know, that's on an annual basis, so, you know, in comparing last year
Right.
to the previous year. And then there's a justifications based on that.
Okay. I remain suspicious of
Suspicious of what?
the data.
Oh,
I mean,
because,
well, for example, in recent years, High Road has reported a very low rate of restraint. And having visited High Road, I know that's not true. And so I don't know whether they're defining restraint differently or just not reporting. And then, you know, other places which have been really pretty restrained, about using restraint, have had relatively higher numbers. Aspire is an example of that. And, you know, so it is absolutely clear to me that High Road and Aspire are not using the same definitions to report restraints.
well, I mean, it depends on the students that you have at any given moment, really. I mean,
Yeah.
you could have a student that requires
true.
very, very high level
That's true.
of seclusion and restraint due to self-injury or whatever, that student leaves. I mean, this has happened to us, that student leaves, exits special ed, the number drops.
Precisely.
No,
Yeah.
that's true.
I mean, you know, in terms of training and the definition, I mean, I think that Connecticut has done a good job of providing the definition that's clear. We, you know, if I have a question about this, was this considered restraint? You know, I always know that I can call. But I really think in terms of individual differences between APSEPs, it depends on the students that you have that year.
And I would say in general, in outplacement settings, a large percentage of restraints and seclusions are a relatively small number of students. And that may be a small period of time when they come in and they're adjusting to being in the placement. But I think that is pretty common.
But one problem we have is the last data that was published by the state was 21-22, I think.
We have 22-23 and 23-24 that's being published.
They're online now?
No, but they're being published. They're in the process.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens with that data.
Yeah.
That'll
Yeah.
look late. back to my sheet, 3,
Well, this is yours.
You know, it's
That's why we're gonna.
3 is supports with, in part with the grant program that the finance group had. The idea is to create therapeutic settings in school in lieu of using suspension and expulsion. And you know, and to reduce the need for out-of-district placements, which is what we've already covered. So I guess I would like to, you know, see about, we'll see what the language looks like about the finance proposal on the competitive grant program. But the purpose to have therapeutic programs in school to avoid the need for exclusionary discipline.
Well, where do we land on the ISS proposals? That ties into this. Or did we, I mean, I know we've had discussions, I don't know if that made it into the recommendations. It's all tied together, I mean, what is it?
Remind us what ISS proposals we
Well,
I
that
think we did in the services subcommittee, I remember a discussion, I'm asking about it because the question, there's either you're kind of conflating, I think, two things. There's one, like, you are in this program for the period of time during which you would be suspended or have been suspended, either in school, ISS, and or out of school, you go to other program instead of sitting at home. So that's a little different. Or I guess it could also be used instead of giving out that quote unquote punishment, it's a place for you to go to. And I think you'd have to do it. I think you'd have to do it pursuant to suspension. Because or else I mean, you could be changing placement, it could be going into that category, but my understanding is that you want to make the time either not have it, either not have a suspension or expulsion happen at all, and or if it's going to happen, have the time be used as productively as possible. Right, so I think it's two different things.
But doesn't that happen now pursuant to like the concept of an interim alternative educational opportunity during the period of suspension?
I think
Or
that's a much
expulsion.
more narrow.
well, for expulsion, yes, but not suspension. 10 days
Anything
is-
over
Over 10
11 days
Yeah.
or over 10 days, starting with the 11th day, the student is supposed to be offered an interim alternative educational opportunity. In districts where there is a more robust alternative educational program offered, I've seen students moved into that kind of a program during that time rather than, you know, provided with homebound instruction or, you know, something else that's kind of more excluded in nature. Is that what we're talking about, establishing more of those kind of alternative to suspension programs?
Yeah, that's what I'm asking. I don't really know.
Well, that's what that, yeah, I mean, I think that's right. There are two different things. One is having, you know, better programs for kids who are expelled. And two is creating a presumption for ISS rather than OSS and using ISS.
Which already exists in the law.
It does,
Right.
and using ISS as a therapeutic intervention rather than as a disciplinary.
So that gets us, again, back to like, what are you doing during ISS and how can it be productive?
And we also have reductions in the number of days of ISS and OSS we can impose on anybody at this point, depending on grade level, right?
And I'm
So-
super confused. Is this just, we're talking about for special education students? Why else are we talking about this?
I'm assuming we're talking about this for special education students. I'm honestly trying to. suss
I don't know, I didn't
out
write
what the proposal is.
I'm asking the
No.
same questions.
It's like the interpretation of the question.
I went back to the services, the list of proposals from the services subcommittee, and I didn't see anything in there specifically on ISS.
We didn't, we didn't address.
It might have discussed.
We definitely talked about ISS multiple times, so if anybody can remember it, so I don't feel
But
like.
I think this is an opportunity when we're going back to like that whole incentive grant of how we look at programs that could do both and, right? So if you're looking at alternative programming, maybe in the spirit of that, that we also talk about how we're dealing with students. It's not going to take care of the ISS, but really students who require, alternative programming, for
Yeah.
periods beyond 10 days. Again, some of those incentive programs could do both and, right? They could service students who require, an alternate setting longer term, but also can take care of a short-term need as well. So I think if there's a way for us to collapse that, that may be an opportunity, right?
I'd kind of like to see how this year's, the impact, I guess, of the reduction in availability of exclusionary discipline for all kids impacts before we start making additional legislative proposals on what happens for special education students. I feel like we already have a mandate in place that if you're excluding a special education student for more than 10 school days in a school year, you have to provide an interim alternative educational opportunity. And that has to be individualized and it has to be determined by the PPT. I'm not sure what more we can ask the legislature to do on that. I feel like it has to be a PPT decision.
That's true.
Yeah, my understanding, I thought that this is like, use the students' time wisely instead of excluding them from classroom and not doing anything useful for them.
We did have that discussion, but I guess it never came into a recommendation.
I think we need to do better for all kids. in that regard.
And that's not the task of this.
Well, but, I mean.
I'm not sure I agree with you on
I
that.
don't
at all.
think you have
Well, I
agree
don't
with
think
all on that.
suspension and expulsion is the task that we have been tasked. It's not, it's
Well,
not important.
special ed kids are, disproportionately subject to,
As a blanket topic, no, but I think if we carve out like a narrow subsection of students that we are tasked with.
We can make it about it. I'm just saying, like, I don't know where it came from.
I'm just
Like,
saying,
it wasn't,
I'm just saying that I think we need to do better in general. It's just what to say about it. We do, we just need to do better in general, for children who are identified and children who are not. I mean, I think it's critical, but I just think in general, we need to fix that.
Can I go on to number 4?
I want to go on to number 7.
Okay.
No, can we go to number 4, Andy?
Well, I mean,
I wanna make
I
sure
recognize,
it's like-
I recognize I'm never going to get support of this group.
Oh, okay, I just wanted to make sure, oh,
For
so you already
Will
know
or
that.
5 and.
Oh, you know that?
I'm going to be pushing it.
but I do have a concern or a question, because there was some conversation about things that didn't get even majority support, still being submitted to
Right.
the legislature, and I have an issue with that.
No,
Because
we
it's
were
just-
told to do that by Jeff Curry multiple times.
Yeah, no,
multiple times, but one person making it is not coming from the subcommittee. I mean, I'm happy to make a lot of suggestions.
But I think the other thing that I worry about too is that also when you look at these legislators really understanding their lens too, because God forbid, if you have folks, and I'm just gonna be honest, sitting here representing school districts, we are always considered to be the big bad wolf. And I don't care who's sitting there. And unfortunately, sometimes when you're writing these things, we are always on the end of, oh yeah, we're not doing right by parents. I just think we have to be careful about that when we're putting things out there, and that's in front of legislators too. We are always the big bad wolf, with this.
But also, we want to get more special education
Right.
teachers. This is not going to get more special
No.
education
Right.
teachers. What's that?
So I think we have to
presumption
talk
that-
about like how we're gonna craft our final report and what ends up in the final report. We had a little bit of discussion on that a couple meetings ago in terms of, are we gonna have consensus recommendations? Are we not going, are we gonna have, like a 2/3 majority gets you a dissenting opinion? Like, what is the process gonna be for inclusion of those things that aren't the consensus, but still have some weight behind them that we want included in the report? I just want to make sure we have 15 minutes remaining in this meeting. Do we have any other proposals that need to be put on the table before we start talking about the process?
Yeah, I'd like to do 7 and 8. Well, 7 we already started with, which is pay of teachers and parents. Do we want to make a recommendation of this area or not?
I don't think we have to parse out special education teachers in general. But I definitely think we need to do some sort of a rate increase for para educators. Teachers are teachers. So I don't know if we parse out special ed teachers. Because if that's the case, you would be looking at all shortage areas.
Well, special ed teachers are clearly one of the big shortage areas.
They are, but if that's the case, then you're looking at speech and language pathologists, right? Who that situation is a lot more dire, school psychologists. So we have to make sure if we're doing that, right, because they all belong to the same union, you have some other groups who, their situation are even more dire than special education teachers, specifically, speech and language pathologists. And they're all in the same union, or they still in the same category of CSD.
Okay, so the two issues in 7, one is pay differentials for shortage areas, and 2 is some sort of minimum pay for parents.
Yeah, I think definitely something for parents. We need money.
What is?
119 report had a minimum.
It's got.
For
Yes.
Paris. Did they say 25 as well?
Minimum wage.
What did you
It's gonna
guys
be
have?
going
It's
up.
in the- it's not the
And also made a recommendation, I think, on parent, a
I think
minimum
they did
salary.
too. I think they did teachers too, didn't they?
And starting teaching salary is different across different districts, so I don't know how we.
Yeah, it's part of contracts.
I'd like to know what Fran's and the superintendent's, weigh-in would be on that.
Because no one has money, okay?
Well, that's of course the problem with the minimum pay for parents, who's gonna pay for it.
Well, that's where we need that big chunk of money, yes, then we can pay for all.
I mean, could we give them like,
Parents and stuff.
could the state tax less and then we don't have to worry about contracts and stuff and say like you get, if you live in the state, we give you a little bit more money to offset your home costs, like there are ways of getting around it.
What I think we heard when they spoke, not only was money, it was, insurance.
Benefits.
A lot of
I would
them
love
have
that.
insurance. But
They
they
make
don't,
them full-time.
they don't.
They don't.
They don't. They
A
make
lot
them
of
30.
people get individual benefits, but family benefits are extremely expensive for parents.
And it depends on the district who's, having it.
But again, it's all bargaining unit contract.
And if you don't have a bargaining unit, so no.
Because we have and I know it's not just our district, but districts have significant shortage areas with paraprofessionals.
Oh, my goodness, yes.
You can't hire any right now. It's outrageous.
Use it so that the healthcare is straight out, a no-go, there's no way of
It
like having that as a
depends
separate.
It depends, I think, because what I heard was like my own district.
Yeah.
We pay, they're full-time, right?
Okay.
But if they don't work, if they have off for vacations, they struggle because they don't get paid. But they do get insurance. They're able to get insurance from us. And whatever we negotiate as a teachers union, they get the same. They have no union, but they have the same. So that's what I know of, but to hear that many districts not having it, but
We
they don't
don't
have
have that. I
insurance.
mean, I'd love to put it in our contract, that'd
Right.
be fine by me.
But no, it's not in our contract for as a teacher. It's what they do. And it's a district.
Oh,
by
there's
district.
separate thing by
It's a
district.
district by district
Oh.
choice, so I'm just telling you what we have and what's worked for us, because they also talked about having that contact time with the teachers to work, and that's what I heard at that meeting. We have that, because our prep time is the same as theirs, so we're able to do that, but not districts. It sounds like those districts are having the parent work the kid contact time, and then they're gone, and that's what I think is a difference. And you can't mandate a district to be able to do that if they don't have the money.
Say that with anything that we are thinking about for increasing pay, public school districts, we have to also think about approved privates. Otherwise, there's going to be this, right, disparity and we won't be able to staff.
Yeah, mass exodus.
Right.
No, we do have a very serious staffing shortage, right? Are we gonna say anything about that? Are we gonna make any recommendations in that regard?
Did it end up in services? The staffing shortage?
We talked about
it.
Increasing pathways to certification.
Well, the funding
That would
increases
be-
that we're proposing also, I think, are designed to provide more money for special education. And the biggest cost in special education is staffing, right?
Right.
So it's not like we're saying nothing about it. We're proposing significant increases in funding. But I guess the question is, can we agree on anything that would be specific to specific positions
And do we
to
explicitly
establish?
mention it with the increase in funding that it would be used for these things?
Well, you certainly have language that say,
Yeah.
we look at the increased funding as an opportunity to increase pay and reduce staff shortages. Maybe that's as far as we need to go, as far as we can go.
I agree with the increase for paras. I think it's something we've talked about, and I'm not here representing the State Advisory Council, but I am on it, and Susan's not here, so I will mention it is one of our priority areas. And we heard it, loud and clear from the panel that was here. And earlier we were talking about, money like for creating programs in districts to keep kids from being out of place, but we also have to develop human capital in our districts, and paras are a huge part of that. And leveraging paras who can also be RBTs, like registered behavior technicians, or even like the speech language pathologists, CODAs. Like we have a lot of things we can do in districts besides just creating blanket programs that can help keep kids in districts. And we have to reinvest in our staff that really are with our students the most.
What would the proposal look like? Totally agree.
No, you're absolutely right.
Is that support for the $25 an hour minimum wage proposal?
I support some kind of minimum. There has to be an increase for paras. It's a profession that they're professional, and we're not paying them like they're professionals.
This be an unfunded mandate?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I'll say anecdotally from our calls that we get at CPAC, I speak to a great number of parents who they say that their child is being outplaced because they don't have staff in district to support their behavioral needs, or their kid can't even be in the general education class because they require constant prompting, and we don't have a paraeducator available for it. It's gotten to almost ridiculous levels of disparities for families and for districts. We need to pay people to be able to have them in our districts.
Well, it's an unfortunate reality that when you're sitting at a PPT table, the PPT can't mandate the creation of the paraprofessional to fill that role. They can say, we'll look for an outplacement, right? We can't say, here's the collective bargaining agreement, and we're going to increase the pay rate for the paraprofessional so that we can hire somebody in that position. PPT doesn't have that power, right?
No, but they do have a responsibility at the end of the day to educate the student in a least restrictive environment.
Right.
And
I agree with you.
when we're not doing what we need to because of things like that, that's a problem. And if we can solve it somehow through this task force, if we have to do a $25 minimum wage, then I would support that.
I'm all for paying paras more. And does anybody worry about like compression?
Yes.
If this is
Yeah.
our minimum,
You're right.
what about the paraeducators who have been here 10 years? And are they coming up against future salary? Yeah.
We had that just like what we paid over the summer, and that is exactly from your point what happened. We ended up paying $25 an hour with ESSER, I think, funding just to get people over the summer. And exactly your point was exactly the phenomena that happened, because we're like, oh shoot, we're paying this, and we have this other thing. Now do we have to bump that? And now we're gonna have to bump this, and then what's the difference between that and the
Right.
future? So you're right about that. That's a part of it. I'm all for it, but there's gonna be more consideration.
Yeah.
You're right.
Is that a reason not to do it?
No,
No, I mean,
it's just we can't fund it. I don't know how, I
Well,
think-
Andy's proposal is that the additional amounts would be funded directly by the state.
Uh-huh. The state has money.
I would go
You
with
got
the
big
big carrots.
I was gonna say, because
We're gonna pay for it as big carrots.
I didn't, so, I thought the state was kind of broke too. I didn't think they had.
But I mean, like, how much does the principle of this matter to people? I feel like it matters a lot, and it underscores everything you talked about.
I do think it's important.
But do we believe that the salary, if you put the salary out, they will come, like the field dream situation,
I
like,
think
there's so much other thing that is a start. We have to-
But maybe it's outlining, and I don't know if this is a part of our recommendation when we're asking for this additional set aside for, or not set aside, but this additional ECS formula. Are we also saying how we're gonna use that money, right? So if we potentially will get this additional, funding through ECS, maybe there's an opportunity to tie both. I don't think we can ask the state doesn't have like big pockets of money. But I think that if we're gonna get this additional dollars that we're already asking the state to give us, maybe we're outlining how we're gonna use it, and paraprofessionals are a part of that. And at least we're making the statement that it's important, because it really is.
It is important and how to approve private to pay for that.
Oh, yeah, that's true. too. You have to figure out.
Parents,
Because you have the
What happens on the?
Yeah, you need some, no, you're right, you need some for that. I don't know.
So where are we landing on this?
Do we say it separately, or do we say it as part of the funding proposal?
Yeah,
That we
that we-
intend to address the staffing shortage through the increased
Yes,
funding for special education.
I think we need to do that anyway, because I don't think we could just ask for blanket amount of money, and I guess the whole report says that, but I think we have to be redundant that these things are going to be kind of how we're tying back to this additional money that we're asking for within the week.
Is there a consensus on that?
Can we just have language in terms of the 50% weight,
Brilliant.
saying that we would like districts to use this money to pay paras a minimum of $25 an hour, or just say
Strongly recommend.
pay paras more?
Recognizing that approved private.
I do.
I mean, that's.
It
Districts
depends
are
on what
paying
the approved private
25.
tuition already is,
But
Right,
if,
but
well,
the-
but if
and whether
they're,
or not there's profit built into it.
well, I doubt, right.
Right.
I hear that, but if, I'm,
But if there
Wallingford,
isn't-
so I'm gonna say Wallingford, if Wallingford's paying $25 an hour for paras, and we're paying 19, how would we get anybody to ever work in our program? And we're a 12-month program.
No, you would change your salary and charge us more.
Well, that's,
Yeah.
that's just what I said, is that
No.
that money
Don't
has to
understand.
come from
All
somewhere.
right, so I think we have basically agreement on that sort of.
Good.
You're right.
Yes.
I think we create a problem. I don't know if we all agree on the solution. Because the solution
Well, I
always
mean-
come back to another problem.
I think we all agree that the staff shortage is a major issue.
Yeah.
That there need to be increases in what we pay paras and
And teachers.
potentially teachers as well.
Yep.
And we need money to do that.
And related service staff.
And, yeah.
Yes.
And I know
All
I
special education staff.
I know I just threw it out there, but
Also.
is there a different funding mechanism where like the state just doesn't have to worry about the contracts and just says you get this much of an offset on your real estate taxes or something? Like, I really feel like that's a way of, we're not worrying about bumping up against the next group.
Well, talk about making legislative
prepare
proposals that are going
educators.
nowhere.
Okay, well, I don't know.
Other than the
I think
education
prepare
committee,
educators.
there is just no chance at all.
That's too bad.
The only thing is, I don't think we should, is we don't want to split a teaching task, a teaching course between related service, special ed teachers or regular ed teachers. I think paraeducators is a safer thing. I can't sit here, I could not sit here and say, we're just paying more for special education teachers. That I think would be splitting folks in districts who are all working very, very hard. And we all see teaching shortages across the board. So I don't think we should do that for teaching staff or related service. I think paraeducators is the way to go. We don't
Okay,
want
that's
to, we don't want to
language.
split a teaching a teaching course.
That's language under the ECS proposal.
Right. But I just think we have to be very clear about how we're spending the ECS dollars that we get. Oh yeah, I'm saying we're getting, them, sorry.
I like
We
that
get
you're
them.
putting out positive.
Yeah, we're gonna get them. We have money, but you know.
All right. And the final proposal had to do with school-based health centers, which maybe not directly ours. They're obviously an enormous factor. They're in 225 of the 1,000 schools now, but the funding, the business model doesn't work without state funding for school-based health centers. They provide a lot of support for kids with special needs. And so, the proposal is that we basically report the efforts now going to fund, to provide additional funding for school-based health.
I gotta say, we're not a poor district and it has made a lot of difference for us, mental health and physical health wise, in terms of families that have students with special education needs, like it's so demanding on their time to have someone at the building has made a big difference. I don't know what they do, but.
Thanks, Brian.
We'll give this.
Take care.
Department of Education. What they leave.
All right, so I think we have sort of agreement on some part of that one.
Yeah, no.
So we're done. So we circle back to process now.
In 3 minutes? What do you got?
Well, the idea is that we now have a long list of recommendations that we have consensus that we'll put together.
So about 4 and 5, right? That's
They're
it.
not going in, they're not, there's no consensus on 4 and 5. There will be those of us pushing 4 and 5 in the legislature next session.
And I don't think we
Who's
didn't talk about six.
who's gonna do the
6, I
counting
think
for
Pete
that?
knows he has.
Well, I mean, that's the question, whether, particularly on 5, you know, there's no doubt that,
No, we're not gonna, no,
there's no doubt that cameras in schools is gonna be a proposal in the legislature.
we're not.
There's no doubt about that. And the question is whether we as a task force want to put something in the report in opposition.
We'll never, yeah, something, we'll never.
Or just do it in the legislative process.
I mean, there's so many projects, I mean, I can't believe that it would be a proposal coming out from the legislature. I would like to see that. And by that, I mean, really not like to see that.
Um,
Hard to know how you feel sometimes, really.
Yeah, I don't know, I'm very,
yes,
lots of diagnoses. That's the truest thing I said.
Can you remind me what we agreed upon?
What?
What did we agree upon?
We're not meeting.
We're not meeting on December 3rd?
You don't need it?
We're gonna circulate the draft
Via
among
email.
us rather than meeting in
And
person.
when are we gonna?
So we're not gonna meet on the 3rd.
That's what we said.
That's right.
And then we're not meeting before the.
Do we need any dates or?
You don't want to have one meeting where we review a draft report and talk about it?
Yeah, we don't want to do that. We wordsmith by
We'll
email.
all come to the Sea
That
party.
didn't work so well last time, they
What'd
tried
you
to
count?
wordsmith by email, that's the only thing I'm concerned about,
Yeah,
that
that's
was, not, that didn't go well.
Right.
I don't recall on our findings draft. I would prefer that we meet and do that in person, even if we intermittently do stuff
Online.
via email
One
or
issue was
online.
that
I
A number
think-
of people cannot be here December 3rd.
Okay, right,
So we could,
so,
we could do a different day.
We could pick another day, but there's something about, ending in person, I think, that,
But more the point, it puts a period at the end. I think that's what.
Right,
happens,
I think that's what I'm
it's
saying.
SID, not.
Yeah.
right, I think,
Ellipse, whatever, I don't know what this is called.
but I'm not here on the 3rd and Patrice is on.
Like the 10th.
I can't do the 10th.
I know, that's the thing, when we change this as teachers, trying to get that, we don't have that.
Yeah.
Much, so we need to have way ahead. Yeah, that's, oh yeah, that's.
So the plan was to do this via email and
We
then
have
not meet
24th.
before we send it. in.
And now we're looking for another day.
Andy, we can all come to your party.
You can come to see party, that's right.
Birthday party.
Come to the party, the Andy's party.
My party.
Gonna convert tickets.
In fact, in many ways, it's
What
not my
about
party.
Thursday, the 12th?
I know.
One of the fundraisers
Okay.
apparently is
I can
karaoke.
do-
Where you can pay money and have somebody sing, and I know I'm gonna be the first victim of that.
I would pay for that, that's fun.
I-
That would be fun to see.
Are you guys open to a meeting on a day other than a Tuesday by any chance?
Whatever makes it
Yeah.
work.
What about Monday the 2nd? Does that work for anybody? Or are you
Um,
already friends?
I could do Monday the 2nd.
Monday.
Yes.
Yeah.
I can do Monday the 2nd.
Well,
By any chance starting at 10?
Yeah, no, I think that's
10 would be great,
Sure. 10 to 12? or-
10 to 12.
Can we do a 10 to 12 on the 2nd?
Is that reasonable for the draft? December 2nd?
what?
What?
This is reasonable as the 3rd.
Yeah, I know, I'll just, okay, late.
You know, December 2nd is my birthday.
Oh, well, then it really will be your party.
Well,
Oh, yeah, it's a
Cake party.
We'll make you a cake.
Very fitting, I think.
Ah, yeah, you should do it on your.
What better way to celebrate your birthday?
Yeah, I can't imagine a better way to celebrate.
All right, December 2nd?
Second, Andy's birthday party / final meeting.
All right,
Sounds
December
amazing.
2nd at 10?
Can you do 9:30?
I'd like to do 10 if we can.
I could, I need to go to a meeting before, so 10 would be great.
Then we can have lunch, just bring some stuff in.
Are we good?
And he makes Randy breakfast and lunch.
No, we.
Yeah.
And cupcakes.
And cupcakes.
You're very generous.
We, I think we should have an end-up lunch, so we'll have lunch here.
So,
You started at 10.
I started-
I just found something.
I'm all about food and.
12 to 1, yeah. Have lunch at 12.
it's time for a proper celebration.
Yeah, 12 to 1,
10 to 1.
lunch.
Because one-
10 to 1 with lunch included.
Okay, but 12 to 1 is off the clock.
That's fine.
Knock my.
So not the third.
Not the third,
Knock
second.
$17 from.
Yeah, hourly.
You go get lunch.
Guess how many I opened?
Okay.
But it's only one of your places, same as hers.
Yeah, but-
I only know one right now. I don't
I thought it
know.
was taking like 20
You want us to pay for lunch?
Well,
But it's okay, it's the only. that's
It's probably the same,
$6.
I don't, I maybe.
No, mine's is.
Yeah, we need.
Oh.
For instance,
But it's the first time that they ever asked us to pay for lunch. I'm like, are you
Yeah.
kidding me? I will do my best. I gotta ask you a question. Is that
Make the change.
Right, so I'm gonna go, yeah. Lisa, I got your text. I guess a text.
Disadvantage of
I
going
don't know if
to
you
class.
can hear me. I'll text you on the phone. Not your text, yeah.
Yeah.
I got a request.
Well, we have rewritten stuff on the other two.
Right, that's the point. They can, huh?
Bye, everybody.
Bye,
Okay.
Karen.
Take care.
I only put like 6 people on it and I put you.
Oh, I'm
To get
the.
the other 6 people in